The night Ethan Reed thought he owned the world was the exact same night. Everything he had ever taken for granted quietly slipped out of his hands. Manhattan glittered beneath him from the rooftop bar of the Ritz-Carlton, a luxurious sanctuary he visited whenever he needed to feel entirely untouchable. The city lights shimmered across the thick glass railing, painting the skyline in strokes of gold and silver. And right there, perfectly framed in their reflection, sat Brooke Sullivan. She was the woman he shouldn't have been. Holding, wrapped tight in a sleek satin dress that clung to her like a second skin. His iPhone lay face down on the dark marble table beside a half-empty glass of expensive Macallan, vibrating endlessly with unread messages from a wife he had long stopped appreciating. Brooke laughed at something he said, a sound that was loud, careless, and hungry for the lavish life she firmly believed he could give her. Ethan smoothed a confident hand over the front of his tailored jacket. The faint, expensive scent of Dior cologne mixing intoxicatingly with the cool, crisp night air. In that moment, he felt invincible. He had just closed a major, career-defining deal. His promotion to chief operating officer was practically guaranteed. A mere formality at this point, and Brooke's hand resting warmly on his thigh only fed the arrogant fantasy that he was the kind of exceptional man who inherently deserved more than the quiet, ordinary life he had waiting at home. He didn't know yet that Olivia Parker was no longer waiting in that life. By 3 a.m, after a lavish private dinner on Fifth Avenue in a string of whispered promises that Brooke foolishly believed were real, Ethan finally slipped into the plush back seat of a black Mercedes town car. The city blurred past the tinted window in streaks of neon and shadows. Central Park, Columbus Circle, the long, dark stretch of the river, all of it passed in a haze. While Ethan casually rehearsed the usual, practiced apology he would give Olivia. It would be something about a client emergency, or maybe networking that just ran too late. It didn't really matter what the excuse was. She always forgave him. She always stayed. But tonight, the house felt profoundly wrong the very moment he stepped inside. It was too quiet, too still, too impossibly clean. He tossed his keys onto the wooden entry table and called out her name into the darkness. There was no answer. A soft, unexpected draft brushed against his face as he walked deeper into the living room. The large bookshelf against the wall looked thinner, stripped of her favorite novels. The knitted throw blanket she always kept, draped over the arm of the couch, was gone. His chest tightened with a sudden, inexplicable panic, but he quickly told himself she had probably just reorganized the room again. Olivia loved tidying up when she was stressed. He turned the corner into the kitchen and stopped moving altogether. On the center of the cold marble island, directly beneath the warm, focused glow of the pendant lamp, sat a small, neat stack of papers and a single silver ring. His ring, the Tiffany band he had taken off earlier that evening and left in his gym bag, now lay perfectly positioned beside the divorce papers she had already Signed. A sleek USB drive rested gently on top of the stack, looking exactly like a quiet, final period at the end of a very long, exhausting sentence. Ethan's throat went completely dry. He reached out for the thick stack of papers, his hands trembling slightly, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs as he skimmed the top page. It wasn't just legal jargon. There were dates, printed screenshots, high-resolution photos, undeniable evidence. It was a meticulous catalog of every single lie he thought he had successfully hid. Every dirty secret he arrogantly believed she would never uncover. Then, his eyes fell upon her familiar, elegant handwriting on a small, square note left beside the drive. I won't scream. I won't beg. I'm done. A sharp, violent chill sliced down his spine. And that was the exact moment when Ethan finally understood the gravity of his reality. Olivia hadn't left out of blind, explosive anger. She had left because she had finally realized, with absolute crystal clarity, that she deserved infinitely more than the man who had taken her for granted. And he was about to learn, in the most painful way possible, just how much he had really lost. Before betrayal had hollowed her out, before the endless nights of shaking hands and choking on silent tears, Olivia Parker had been the kind of woman people always described as steady. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. She was just incredibly, reliably steady. As the daughter of a hard-working mechanic and a school librarian from rural Indiana, she grew up fundamentally believing that true love was something you built day by day, board by board, like a sturdy house capable of weathering the darkest storms. At 33 years old, she had carried those pure, wholesome values directly into the life she made with Ethan Reed. They shared a small, charming townhouse in New Jersey, boasting a distant view of Manhattan's shimmering skyline from the bedroom window, and a quiet hope that the future would always be kinder than the past. Olivia had once been a brilliant senior marketing strategist in Midtown, widely known for her calm, soothing voice in the middle of chaotic board meetings and her uncanny, almost terrifying ability to read people's true intentions. Her colleagues used to joke over drinks that she could spot a lie before it even fully formed on someone's tongue. Ironically, that exact same gift completely failed her when she needed it the absolute most. She gave up her demanding, lucrative job 2 years before the night Ethan betrayed her. The decision wasn't exactly forced upon her, but it wasn't entirely free either. Ethan had just started a grueling, highly competitive MBA program, and they had mutually agreed that she would step back to help cover the massive tuition costs, manage the endless upkeep of the house, and start the grueling process of fertility treatments. It was an exhausting, deeply emotional marathon that she ended up running mostly alone. They proudly told their friends. It was a mutual choice, a team effort. In truth, it was a massive, silent Sacrifice Olivia made simply because she believed in their shared dream. She believed in him. Their home bore the unmistakable marks of her quiet, hopeful touch. There was a small, curated collection of paperback novels neatly stacked by the reading window. A handmade ceramic mug she had bought from a struggling Brooklyn street vendor sat by the coffee maker. A framed photo from their weekend trip to Maine hung in the hallway, showing Olivia laughing as the wind blew her hair across her face, with Ethan smiling and kissing her temple. In that specific picture, she looked undeniably, radiantly happy, and real happiness, she knew deep down, was a rare and precious thing. Olivia's world revolved not around luxury or status, but around deep meaning. She used the exact same iPhone for 4 years without complaint. She typed on the same battered MacBook Air she had owned since college. Her absolute favorite. Mornings were the simple, quiet ones. Just drinking hot coffee out of a chipped mug, watching the sun slowly rise over the distant skyline. It was a brief, sacred moment of stillness before the heavy demands of the day inevitably swallowed her whole. But life had bruised her significantly more than she ever openly admitted. The miscarriage was the deepest wound, the one she hid the most fiercely. It had happened quietly, tragically, on a dreary, rainy Thursday afternoon while Ethan was miles away at a loud networking event in the city. She had called him from the bathroom floor, her voice trembling and broken. He promised he would leave immediately and come home, but he didn't. He didn't walk through the door until hours later. He apologized profusely. Of course. He blamed the terrible city. Traffic. He blamed bad timing. He blamed his phone dying. He blamed absolutely anything and everything but himself. And Olivia, utterly exhausted, bleeding, and drowning in grief, simply let it go. She always let it go. After that terrible day, a part of her shut down. She stopped talking about having children. She stopped talking about her dormant career dreams. Eventually, she stopped talking about herself at all. Little by little, day by day, her entire life shrank down to the exact size of Ethan's ambitions. She cooked his healthy meals. She organized his chaotic schedules. She sat quietly and listened to his endless frustrations, his petty workplace complaints, and his ever-growing, insatiable hunger for elite status and corporate recognition. She purposefully made their home soft and yielding so that he could go out into the world and be sharp and ruthless. She made herself incredibly small so that his world could feel infinitely large. But she never, in her wildest nightmares, expected that the man she had built her entire existence around would betray her so thoroughly and completely. Still, despite the erosion of her spirit, faint traces of her old brilliance remained dormant, just waiting patiently for the exact moment she would finally remember who she was. On the lonely nights when Ethan worked late, Olivia would sit alone at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and scattered scraps of paper She would meticulously sketch out brilliant ideas for mobile products she thought she would never actually build, writing catchy, innovative slogans she assumed she would never have the chance to pitch. Ethan sometimes walked in, glanced over her shoulder at the papers, and murmured distractedly, "You're so incredibly good at this, Liv." But the very next morning, he would go right back to treating her like she was just a domestic assistant, someone merely living on the quiet sidelines of his impending greatness. She didn't know then that one of those random sketches, drawn hastily on a crumpled Starbucks napkin, would one day become the exact weapon that saved her life. She didn't know yet that she was infinitely stronger than the devastating storm that was coming for her. And she certainly didn't know that losing Ethan Reed would become the glorious beginning of a magnificent destiny she had never even dared to imagine. The world Olivia Parker lived in wasn't glamorous. Not in the way Ethan liked to pretend it was to his colleagues. Their townhouse in New Jersey sat nestled on a quiet, unassuming street lined with towering maple trees. It was the kind of idyllic, suburban place where friendly neighbors waved while walking there. Golden retrievers and children rode their bicycles down the sidewalks until the streetlights flickered on at dusk. From their bedroom window, you could see the Manhattan skyline shimmering like a mirage in the distance. It stood as a constant, towering reminder of the elite life Ethan desperately wanted, and the grounded life Olivia thought they were successfully building together. Every single morning began in the exact same rhythmic way. Olivia would wake up long before sunrise, wrap herself tightly in a soft, oversized gray cardigan, and pad quietly into the cold kitchen, where the single under-cabinet light glowed softly like a guiding night lamp. She would grind fresh coffee beans, letting the rich, familiar scent settle her fraying nerves, and open the heavy curtains just in time to watch the first pale light of dawn spill beautifully over the waking city. On the granite counter sat her old MacBook Air, always half-charged, always waiting patiently for the creative ideas she rarely allowed herself the time to finish. But across the river, Ethan moved in a completely different reality. It was a ruthless world of towering glass towers, impeccably tailored Italian suits, and high-stakes power breakfasts at the Four Seasons. His expansive office on the 42nd floor overlooked the bustling financial district. He had a sleek, modern standing desk, a heavy Mont Blanc pen laid carefully beside his top-of-the-line MacBook Pro, and a beautifully framed certificate from his elite MBA program hung proudly on the minimalist wall. Absolutely everything in that curated space made him feel like someone vastly important, someone who inherently belonged at the very top of the food chain. And simultaneously, everything back at home made him feel suffocated and trapped. Olivia didn't realize the depth of his discontent at first. She was far too busy managing endless, heartbreaking fertility appointments, clearing out the dusty guest room to hopefully convert it into a nursery they might never actually need, and obsessively clipping grocery coupons to keep their shared finances afloat after pouring the vast majority of her life savings into funding Ethan's expensive degree. Meanwhile, Ethan spent his days completely surrounded by ambitious people who constantly fed his fragile ego. There were senior executives who loudly praised his strategic mind, eager young consultants who visibly admired his ruthless confidence, and jealous colleagues who joked over scotch that he was barely 5 years away from running the entire company. It was exactly in those high-pressure boardrooms and exclusive rooftop lounges that Ethan began to slowly drift toward the polished version of himself he liked much better. It was a version untethered by mundane domestic responsibility, boring routine, or the quiet, unconditional steadiness of the wife waiting patiently at home. The cracks in their marriage weren't sudden or explosive. They appeared incredibly slowly, creeping in like invisible hairline fractures in a pane of thick glass. First came the perpetually late nights. Ethan claimed he desperately needed to stay ahead of the corporate curve, arguing that those who truly wanted executive promotions had to work twice as hard as everyone else. Olivia, ever supportive, believed him wholeheartedly. She lovingly packed him healthy dinners in glass containers, texted him gentle reminders to take screen breaks, and constantly told herself that this temporary sacrifice would eventually pay off for their family. Then came the missed appointments. He started skipping crucial fertility consultations, rescheduling important doctor visits, and completely ignoring the meticulous folder she had created detailing their remaining treatment options. He always had a perfectly tailored reason ready. The meetings ran too long. The VIP clients needed him for dinner. A senior partner had called his cell at the absolute last minute. But the absolute worst part wasn't the flimsy excuses themselves. It was how incredibly small and foolish she felt each and every time he turned the tables, making her feel dramatic, needy, or unreasonable for simply wanting her husband to be there for her. Their home, once warm, vibrant, and filled with easy conversation, grew progressively quieter. Olivia found herself sitting entirely alone more often at the dining room table eating cold food, on the living room couch watching television unseeingly, or crying quietly in the car outside the local pharmacy. She desperately tried to keep herself busy to stave off the loneliness, reorganizing the pantry alphabetically, scrubbing the baseboards until her hands ached, doing absolutely anything to fill the vast, echoing empty spaces Ethan left behind. Sometimes, in a desperate bid for connection, she would drive all the way into Manhattan to surprise him with lunch, only to be politely but firmly told by a chilly receptionist that Mr. Reed was out with important clients. She would wander the crowded city streets afterward, her cold hands wrapped tightly around a paper Starbucks cup, biting the inside of her cheek, trying her hardest not to cry as she passed happy couples holding hands on Fifth Avenue. She kept the painful truth firmly locked away inside her chest. Their marriage wasn't crumbling just because adult life was hard. It was actively crumbling because Ethan was already comfortably living in an entirely different world, a shiny, superficial world where Olivia simply no longer fit the aesthetic. And, very soon, she would discover just how dangerously far that world had already pulled him away from her. Ethan Reed didn't wake up one sunny morning and consciously decide to destroy his marriage and betray his wife. His moral fall was significantly slower than that. It was quiet, gradual, and meticulously built from 1,000 tiny, selfish choices he easily justified to himself, one convenient excuse at a time. The very first time he met Brooke Sullivan, he honestly wasn't looking for a sordid affair. He was simply looking for validation. He craved the specific, intoxicating kind of admiration that Olivia no longer gave him, mostly because she was too exhausted and busy holding the actual foundation of their life together. It happened during a high-stakes, quarterly strategy retreat in Midtown, held in a sprawling, glass-walled conference center on the 35th floor. Dozens of executives in sharp, tailored suits tapped aggressively away on their MacBook Pros, casually sipping catered artisan lattes while massive digital screens flashed relentlessly with red and green stock tickers and quarterly projections. Ethan absolutely thrived in this high-pressure environment. Here, he wasn't a flawed husband burdened with heavy domestic responsibilities and a grieving wife. He was a certified rising star. He was a man people actively listened to. He was a man people physically stood up straighter for when he entered the room. Brooke entered that corporate world exactly like a stray spark hitting a pile of dry autumn leaves. She was 27 years old, fiercely ambitious, and possessed sharp, assessing green eyes that scanned a crowded room the exact way a hungry hunter tracks movement in the brush. Fresh out of a cutthroat consulting firm in Dallas, she had aggressively fought her way up the corporate ladder, and she wasn't the least bit shy about wanting infinitely more. When she spoke up during her very first breakout session, boldly and accurately, calling out a flawed revenue projection with hard data to back it up, the entire room turned to look at her. Even Ethan noticed her brilliance. Later that afternoon, standing near the bustling espresso bar, she approached him first. "You're Ethan Reed, right? The VP of Strategy." The flattery was incredibly subtle, but it was perfectly, expertly timed. Ethan, who was secretly exhausted from the relentless mental strain of constantly impressing the senior partners, soaked it up like a sponge. Brooke smoothly complimented his market insights. She laughed brightly at his dry jokes. She asked him probing, intelligent questions, acting exactly as if his professional opinion mattered significantly more than anyone else's in the entire building. With Olivia, conversations had recently become heavily practical and mundane. They talked about rising utility bills, depressing doctor visits, and weekly grocery lists. Brooke, on the other hand, made Ethan feel genuinely interesting. Again, she made him feel young, vibrant, and deeply wanted. He dangerously mistook that massive ego boost for genuine human connection. What initially started as mutual professional respect rapidly devolved into heavy flirtation. Late-night text messages about work presentations slowly morphed into deeply personal confessions about their lives. Ethan easily told himself it wasn't technically cheating since absolutely nothing physical had happened yet. But emotionally, the boundary line was already completely crossed and left in the dust. Meanwhile, Brooke was meticulously studying him. She clearly saw the expensive luxury watch on his wrist, the swaggering confidence in his stride, and the undeniable early promotion track he was riding. She saw a powerful man whose rising corporate orbit could effortlessly lift her significantly higher than she could ever manage to climb on her own. She easily identified his weaknesses, his massive pride, his insatiable hunger for success, and his desperate, pathetic need to be constantly admired. She fed those weaknesses gently and deliberately, exactly like hand-feeding raw meat to a captive lion. Her girlfriends had explicitly warned her over drinks. Don't ever get involved with married executives. They'll just use you and throw you away. But Brooke wasn't naive or helpless. She firmly thought she was using Ethan, too. She viewed it as a mutual, beneficial transaction, a necessary shortcut in a ruthless world where shortcuts were rarely offered to girls like her. The very first time Ethan and Brooke physically crossed the line was during a boozy company happy hour. It was held in a dim, expensive bar deep in the financial district. Warm, golden lights reflected beautifully off polished glass tables. People slowly paid their tabs and left one by one, until only a very few remained in the booths. Brooke sat right beside him on the velvet banquette, sitting significantly closer than was professionally necessary. Her intoxicating perfume, a heavy blend of jasmine and something much darker, wrapped tightly around his senses, blurring his judgment. She leaned in and told him, her voice low and husky, that she deeply admired how incredibly hard he worked, how genuinely brilliant his mind was, and how wildly successful he had already become. Olivia had once said those exact same beautiful things to him, too. But that was years ago, back when they were struggling. Their first kiss wasn't sweet or romantic. It was entirely reckless. It was stolen in the dark, narrow back hallway near the restrooms. It was too fast, too aggressive, too desperate. Ethan actually pulled away first. A sudden, sharp flash of genuine guilt appearing in his eyes. But Brooke only smiled a slow, wicked smile, gently brushing her thumb along his tense jawline. No one ever has to know, she whispered softly. And Ethan, desperate for the fantasy, chose to believe her. From that fateful night forward, he officially lived two entirely different lives. He played the role of the respectable, hard-working husband who came home exhausted and late, while simultaneously being the thrilling, reckless man who slipped into luxury downtown hotels with a beautiful younger woman who made him feel like the absolute center of the universe. He constantly told himself that Olivia was simply too fragile, Too overly emotional, and far too consumed by the lingering grief of the miscarriage to truly understand him anymore. He twisted reality, convincing himself that he inherently deserved this outlet, that this sordid affair was strictly temporary, and that he could easily control absolutely everything without getting caught. But he didn't see the massive, looming truth. Brooke wasn't just a simple, temporary mistake. She was the very first domino in a long, intricate line. And, once it finally fell, his entire, carefully curated world would go crashing down. Right along with it. The exact moment Olivia Parker realized something was truly, fundamentally wrong, didn't come accompanied by loud fireworks or a shouting match. It arrived, quietly, on a perfectly ordinary, mundane Wednesday afternoon. It was the specific kind of dreary day where the sky looked perpetually tired, and the thick air tasted heavily like impending rain. She was standing in the bedroom, mindlessly folding a basket of warm laundry. The soft, rhythmic hum of the dryer down the hall filling the comfortable silence of the house. That was when she noticed it. It was a very small, incredibly distinct smear of lipstick rubbed directly on the inside collar of one of Ethan's expensive white dress shirts. It was a vivid shade of deep, bold rose, a vibrant, daring color she had absolutely never worn a single day in her life. Her beating heart completely paused in her chest, but her hand surprisingly didn't. Operating on pure shock, she just kept folding, methodically smoothing out the wrinkles in the fabric the exact same way she habitually tried to smooth out her mounting worries. When Ethan finally got home late that night, shrugging off his coat, she asked him incredibly gently, holding the shirt up, "Whose lipstick is this?" He didn't even blink or break eye contact. His expression was a mask of mild annoyance. "It's a client's." She practically tackled and hugged me goodbye after we signed the merger. She was completely drunk. "Just relax. Live." The smooth, effortless lie slid directly off his tongue with such a practiced, chilling ease that it made her stomach violently twist into a knot. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue or demand to see his phone. She simply nodded, quietly, tossed the shirt into the hamper, and went right back to stirring the boiling pasta on the kitchen stove. But something fundamental deep inside her core permanently shifted. It was something incredibly small, but something intensely dangerous. It was a quiet, horrifying awareness that she was absolutely no longer living with the good man she had joyfully married. She was now living with a complete stranger, someone who had expertly learned exactly how to look her in the eye and lie without even flinching. Over the next few agonizing weeks, the glaring warning signs multiplied rapidly, spreading like dark shadows at dusk. Ethan abruptly changed the passcodes on his laptop and phone that he used to freely share with her. He started taking exceptionally long, hot showers the exact moment he walked through the front door, washing away the scent of the city. He guarded his iPhone with his life. keeping it face down at all times, treating it like it held nuclear launch codes. He even suddenly bought a brand new, expensive designer cologne without telling her something significantly stronger, sharper, and entirely unfamiliar to her nose. Still, despite the mounting agony, Olivia said absolutely nothing. She wasn't mentally or emotionally ready to confront him and blow up her life without undeniable, concrete proof. Not after absolutely everything she had faithfully invested in this man, the long years, the drained savings accounts, the personal, career dreams she had willingly buried deep in the dirt just so he could ruthlessly chase his own. She desperately needed the cold, hard truth, not just a cloud of paranoid suspicion. And the absolute truth finally came to her in a public way she never, ever expected. It happened at a lavish, highly publicized corporate charity reception held downtown. Olivia initially hadn't planned to go, feeling exhausted and out of place. But Ethan had aggressively insisted. "It'll look incredibly bad for my image if I show up to this thing alone," he had said sharply, already standing in front of the mirror, impatiently buttoning his silver cufflinks. "Just please try to look polished tonight." "Okay." Polished. He threw the word at her as if she were a scuffed hardwood floor he desperately needed to shine before company arrived. Olivia swallowed her hurt, wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress, and spent an hour carefully curling her hair, desperately hoping it would be enough to make him proud. When they finally arrived at the massive hotel ballroom, a breathtaking, golden space completely filled with dripping crystal chandeliers and wealthy executives holding flutes of expensive champagne, she immediately felt entirely out of place. Ethan walked several paces ahead of her, barely even glancing back to see if she was following, already seamlessly slipping into the charismatic, arrogant version of himself that thrived so completely under expensive lighting. She stood quietly by herself near a long table of fancy hors d'oeuvres, actively trying her hardest not to touch her fingers protectively to her flat stomach. A sad, nervous physical habit she had subconsciously developed immediately after the trauma of the miscarriage. Wealthy, important people drifted endlessly around her, murmuring loudly about changing market trends and corporate partnerships she didn't fully understand anymore. Then, she heard it. It was a hushed, scandalous whisper coming from two women standing directly behind her. "Wait, is that Ethan's wife standing over there?" "No way." "Really? I honestly thought Brooke was his girlfriend." "He literally brings Brooke absolutely everywhere with him. That poor, frumpy woman probably has absolutely no idea what's going on." The cruel words hit her spine like jagged stones. Her pale hands trembled so violently around her champagne glass that the delicate crystal stem dug painfully into her palm. She didn't dare turn around to look at them. She didn't even dare to breathe. She simply stood frozen, staring straight ahead across the room, watching her husband Ethan laugh uproariously with a tight circle of attractive coworkers. He was laughing with them in the exact, joyful way he used to laugh with her years ago, back in their cramped apartment. In that horrifying moment, the entire glittering world blurred violently around. The edges. The massive ballroom suddenly felt entirely too warm, overwhelmingly loud, and blindingly bright. She managed to set her fragile glass down on the table just before her shaking fingers could drop it, and then she slipped, unnoticed, out the heavy glass doors onto the stone balcony, where the freezing, biting night air violently slapped her flushed cheeks. She leaned heavily against the cold metal railing, her eyes burning with unshed tears as she desperately tried to steady her ragged breath. The agonizing truth she had been actively trying to avoid facing was no longer hiding in the shadows of her mind. It was out in the open air, a known fact, casually and cruelly whispered by complete strangers. Her sacred marriage wasn't just quietly breaking behind closed doors, it was being publicly, humiliatingly mocked. A few tense minutes later, Ethan finally noticed her absence and found her standing outside in the cold. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone sounding significantly more annoyed by the inconvenience than actually concerned for her well-being. Olivia quickly wiped her wet eyes with the back of her hand and turned to face him. "Who is Brooke?" Ethan completely froze. It lasted for just a fraction of a second, just long enough for her perceptive eyes to clearly catch the stark, terrified truth flickering wildly behind his pupils, right before he aggressively slammed his arrogant, deceptive mask back into place. "She's no one," he said entirely too quickly, his voice defensive. "Please, Liv. Don't start drama tonight." And just like that, looking at his lying face, Olivia knew with absolute, heartbreaking certainty that she wasn't currently in the process of losing him. She had already lost him a long time ago. For several weeks immediately following the disastrous charity reception, Olivia moved through her daily life exactly like someone trying to walk underwater. Every single sound reached her muffled and distorted. Every physical motion felt incredibly heavy and exhausting. And taking every single breath felt just a little too hard to manage. She surprisingly wasn't furious yet. She simply wasn't emotionally ready for that stage of grief. Mostly, she just felt entirely, devastatingly hollow. It was a profound, quiet kind of sadness that settled permanently deep into her bones, making absolutely everything, even small, mundane tasks like brushing her tangled hair or unloading the groceries from the car, feel like climbing a massive, sheer mountain she didn't ever remember choosing to scale. She desperately tried to mentally convince herself that she could still somehow fix things. She told herself that maybe Ethan was just severely overwhelmed by his promotion track, deeply stressed out, and pulled in far too many directions by the company. She wanted so desperately to believe that the kind, ambitious man she had eagerly married still lived buried somewhere deep inside his chest. But each and every single gentle attempt she made at romantic connection only served to violently widen the freezing distance between them. One particular night, She spent hours meticulously cooking his absolute favorite dish, a complex lemon rosemary chicken, the exact same meal they used to joyfully cook together on Sunday evenings when they were broke and happy. She lit expensive candles. She set out their good and used wedding china. She even put on a beautiful silk blouse he had once told her he loved. Ethan finally came home over 2 hours late, smelling strongly like a loud, crowded bar she'd never been to, aggressively muttering some vague excuse about running into clients for drinks. He barely even glanced at the beautiful, romantic table setting before callously saying, "I actually already ate." Downtown, and heading straight upstairs for the shower without a second look. Olivia sat entirely alone at the dining table for nearly an hour in absolute silence, staring blankly at the cold, untouched food until the expensive candles burned dangerously low and the melting wax pooled and dripped onto the table like hot tears. It wasn't just the sheer neglect that was killing her, it was the active, deliberate erasure of her existence. Every single day, Ethan callously erased another vibrant part of her soul, her loving efforts, her quiet presence, her inherent human worth, until she honestly wasn't entirely sure what was left of herself. The real, undeniable breaking point finally came incredibly quietly. It was a dismal Friday night. Freezing, heavy rain hammered violently against the living room windows. Olivia faithfully waited up for Ethan on the couch, obsessively tracking the severe storm patterns on her weather app, anxiously imagining him stuck in gridlocked traffic or caught helplessly in the freezing downpour. When he finally walked through the front door, completely soaked, shivering, and highly irritated, she immediately rushed to the bathroom to get him a warm, dry towel. Instead of showing any shred of gratitude for her care, he violently snapped at her. "Stop trying to smother me. Live. God, I already have enough pressure going on at work without you hovering." Her hands completely froze, hovering midair with the towel. She wasn't smothering him. She was simply trying to love him. Later that night, while Ethan slept deeply and heavily beside her, completely unbothered, Olivia lay wide awake in the dark, staring blankly up at the ceiling. Shadows. His heavy arm lay draped comfortably across his own chest, intentionally avoiding touching her. There was a time, not so long ago, when he slept curled tightly against her back, their legs comfortably tangled together beneath the sheets, breathing in perfect, rhythmic sync. She vividly remembered those beautiful mornings, the profound comfort, the undeniable warmth, the soft, sleepy murmur of good morning. Baby pressed affectionately against her cheek. Now, lying in the exact same bed, she felt exactly like an unwanted stranger trespassing in her own home. Her exhausted mind simply wouldn't stop violently spinning. Every single deep-seated insecurity she had ever harbored clawed its way forcefully to the surface of her thoughts. Maybe I'm truly just not enough for him anymore. Maybe I changed entirely too much after the miscarriage. Maybe he really did just intellectually outgrow me. Maybe this entire disaster is actually my fault. The suffocating grief wrapped around her throat so tightly she could hardly breathe the stale air. She silently slipped out from under the heavy duvet and walked like a ghost into the master bathroom, clicking the door completely shut. As quietly as possible, so she wouldn't accidentally wake him. Under the harsh, unforgiving, buzzing fluorescent light of the vanity, she looked deeply at herself in the mirror. She saw terribly puffy, red eyes, unwashed hair twisted messily into a careless bun, and slumped, defeated shoulders. She was staring at a woman whose vibrant light had been aggressively dimmed down to absolute, bare minimum survival mode. She honestly didn't recognize the face looking back at her. And then, the massive, emotional dam finally broke. Heart-wrenching sobs tore violently out of her throat so loudly and fiercely that she had to clap both of her hands tightly over her mouth to muffle the agonizing sound. She slid slowly down the wall to the freezing cold tile floor, pulling her knees to her chest and pressing her forehead against them as hot, bitter tears completely soaked through the thin fabric of her pajamas. Every single hurt she had ever silently swallowed down over the years came pouring out of her in a flood. The devastating, lonely trauma of the miscarriage, the crushing, daily loneliness of the empty house, the humiliating, cruel whispers of the women at the gala, the sickening sight of the rose, lipstick on his collar, the shady, hidden text messages, the endless, unconditional love she constantly poured into a black hole without ever getting a single drop in return. She sat on the floor and cried until her chest physically ached, until her head throbbed with a blinding migraine, until she felt she had absolutely nothing left inside her to give. When the violent, emotional storm inside her finally quieted down into shallow hiccups, Olivia felt frighteningly, profoundly empty. A strange, heavy numbness washed entirely over her, the exact, terrifying kind of absolute numbness that pushes people to do incredibly desperate, irreversible things. She stood up, her legs shaky, but her core newly determined. She turned off the buzzing bathroom light and walked silently back to the bedroom doorway. Ethan slept incredibly soundly on the mattress. He was completely unbothered, entirely unaffected, and blissfully unaware that his cruel arrogance had just permanently broken the exact woman who once would have willingly walked barefoot through roaring fire just to keep him warm. Olivia stood in the shadows and watched him breathing for a very long moment, the salt of her tears drying tight and itchy on her cheeks. Her heart still hurt, terribly, but something fundamental deep inside her chest shifted. It was barely perceptible, incredibly quiet, but it was enough. It was the very first, tiny, microscopic crack of her grand awakening. He didn't know it yet, sleeping in his ignorance, but she was actively taking her very first, definitive step away from his shadow. The morning immediately following her complete emotional breakdown, Olivia Parker woke up with a blinding, pounding headache and eyes so incredibly swollen. It felt physically painful just to blink against the light. She sat rigidly on the edge of the mattress for a very long time, staring blankly at the faint golden line of morning sunlight slipping quietly through a gap in the blackout curtains. Ethan had already left the house for work. He almost always left incredibly early on Fridays, conveniently claiming he desperately needed the absolute quiet time in the empty office to prepare for his massive executive meetings. He hadn't even noticed that she'd spent the night crying herself completely empty on the cold bathroom floor. Or, perhaps, a darker part of her realized he had noticed, and he just simply didn't care enough to ask. Olivia walked to the bathroom and showered incredibly slowly, letting the scalding hot water pound against her back, trying to let it physically ground her to reality. She didn't have a master plan yet. Not yet. But she knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that she simply couldn't survive another agonizing night like the one before. She wrapped a thick, fluffy towel around her shivering body, walked into the quiet kitchen, and meticulously made a pot of strong black coffee with physically trembling hands. Her pale reflection glimmered faintly in the dark glass of the microwave door. She looked washed out, bone-tired, completely defeated. But crucially, she was still standing on her own 2 feet. Then, something entirely unexpected happened that would change the trajectory of her life forever. Her phone resting on the counter suddenly buzzed loudly with a push notification from an incredibly old, forgotten Gmail account, an ancient inbox she rarely ever used anymore, one she had almost completely forgotten even existed. She frowned, picked up the device, tapped the glowing screen, and completely froze. It was an automated, routine system reminder from a dormant cloud archive service she had set up years ago. Your saved file from 5 years ago has been successfully restored. Attached directly below the automated text was a small preview thumbnail. It was a high-resolution scan of a crumpled, coffee-stained Starbucks napkin, drawn across the paper in thick black ink was a highly complex, brilliant mobile app user flow diagram. It was entirely in her distinct handwriting, featuring her specific structural arrows and her detailed, visionary annotations. Olivia's heart violently lurched into her throat. She vividly remembered that exact night, Ethan had been aggressively pacing around the tiny living room of their first, cramped Brooklyn apartment, complaining bitterly that his elite development team simply couldn't figure out a massive, fatal onboarding issue for their new software. She had calmly grabbed a pen off the table, listened to his problem, and effortlessly sketched out a simple, incredibly intuitive, revolutionary digital pathway. Ethan had stopped pacing, his jaw dropping as he looked at the napkin. He had eagerly taken a photo of it with his phone, kissed her forehead excitedly, and said, "You're an absolute genius, Liv. Seriously, this is it." But he absolutely never, ever mention that napkin sketch again to anyone. Not when he confidently pitched the bold new product direction to the board at work. Not when he proudly won Employee of the Quarter for the innovation. Not when he arrogantly described the app's massive, viral growth in interviews as the direct result of my personal visionary leadership, and definitely not when he started using the resulting bonus money to stay out late drinking with Brooke. Olivia quickly clicked the archived image on her phone. It opened in full, crystal clear resolution. It was digitally time-stamped, securely synced, and fully authenticated by the server. She scrolled down to the bottom of the old email chain and saw the short, simple message she had once jokingly emailed to herself that night, just in case Ethan ever forgets this brilliant fix was my idea. Her throat tightened painfully, a massive lump forming. Her younger, naive past self had somehow miraculously protected her future without even fully knowing the horrific betrayal she would eventually need saving from. She stared intently at the image of the napkin sketch exactly as if it were a glowing, magical lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. Because, in a very real, legal way, it was absolute, undeniable proof. Real, tangible proof. It was proof of her massive intellectual contribution to his success. It was absolute proof that the man she loved with all her heart had ruthlessly taken significantly more from her than just her loyalty and her youth. He had explicitly taken credit for her mind. He had stolen her opportunity. He had stolen her corporate recognition. He had stolen her brilliance. And right then, something deep inside her chest violently snapped. It didn't snap in despair or sadness, but in sharp, blinding clarity. Olivia stood up much straighter, her racing pulse finally steadying into a calm, lethal rhythm. The thick, suffocating fog of grief in her mind began to rapidly lift, instantly replaced by a razor-sharp focus she hadn't felt in years. This entire nightmare absolutely wasn't just about marital betrayal anymore. This was now about corporate theft. This was about basic human dignity. This was about aggressively reclaiming absolutely everything she had given up so willingly to a monster. She quickly changed into professional clothes, grabbed her sturdy leather tote bag, and walked purposefully out the front door with her MacBook tucked securely under her arm. She didn't know exactly where she was going when she got in the car, until an hour later when she found herself standing confidently on the sidewalk directly outside a towering, imposing glass building on Park Avenue. It was a highly prestigious, cutthroat family law and corporate litigation firm. It was the exact same firm she had desperately bookmarked on her browser late one night while crying quietly in the dark living room weeks ago. Stepping inside the cavernous, echoing marble lobby, she momentarily felt incredibly small, like a simple woman who absolutely didn't belong among the polished travertine floors and intimidating, expensive leather chairs. But she forcefully pushed her shoulders back and forced herself to walk forward, checking in confidently at the towering mahogany front desk. Mere minutes later, Olivia sat in a plush chair across a massive desk from a senior divorce attorney. The woman had incredibly sharp, intelligent eyes, but a voice that somehow miraculously softened the harsh reality of everything without weakening its impact. "I honestly don't know exactly what to do," Olivia whispered, clutching her bag. "Let's simply start with exactly what evidence you currently have," the seasoned attorney replied gently, pulling out a legal pad. "Show me everything." Olivia opened her laptop, pulled up the screen, and placed the digital image of the napkin sketch squarely between them on the desk, offering it up like a holy confession. The attorney's perfectly arched eyebrows lifted almost immediately as she read the annotations and the timestamp. "This single document," the attorney said slowly, a predatory smile forming on her lips, "is significantly more powerful and dangerous than you even realize." For the very first time in months of agony, Olivia felt a bright, burning flicker of something entirely other than pain. She felt genuine possibility. She literally felt the solid ground physically shifting beneath her feet, not collapsing into a sinkhole, but finally opening up into a path forward. And somewhere incredibly deep inside her soul, a strong, fierce voice she hadn't listened to in years finally spoke up loud and clear. "He took absolutely everything from you. Now, it's time to take your life back." Olivia stepped confidently out of the massive glass doors of the Park Avenue Law office, feeling exactly like someone had completely rearranged the physical ground beneath her feet. It wasn't in a terrifying or disorienting way, but in a profound way that made her see the entire chaotic city differently. The blaring yellow taxis, the thick white steam rising aggressively from the subway grates, the towering, intimidating glass buildings reflecting the sun, they all suddenly looked significantly sharper, sounded much louder, and felt infinitely more real. She absolutely wasn't the exact same fragile, terrified woman who had walked in, trembling through those doors just 20 minutes earlier. She had a concrete plan now. Or, at the very least, she held the dangerous, explosive beginning of one. Her new, brilliant attorney had given her a highly specific, extensive list of financial documents to discreetly gather before filing. She needed joint bank statements, Ethan's complex executive compensation packages, hidden email exchanges, and absolutely anything tangentially related to the inception of the app idea. In these specific corporate battles, knowledge, the attorney had said gently, but firmly, is absolute leverage. Olivia walked briskly toward the busy corner Starbucks, repeating the powerful phrase in her head like a sacred mantra. Leverage. She ordered a strong, black coffee and sat down at a small table right by the massive window. Her newly awakened mind aggressively buzzed, rapidly racing back and forth between profound anger, lingering fear, and something entirely unfamiliar to her recent life. Something incredibly close to genuine hope. She reached into her purse for her phone, fully intending to call her sister. "Emma," but her screen instantly lit up brightly before she could even dial the number. It was a text message from a completely unsaved, but vaguely familiar number. Liv, it's Noah. I just saw you walking outside the legal building on Park. Are you okay? Her breath violently caught in her tight throat. Noah Carter. She honestly hadn't seen him up close in person in several years. She only knew of his life from the occasional professional LinkedIn update, or from reading glowing Forbes news articles about his wildly successful, rapidly expanding fintech company. Back in their college days, he had been her absolute closest, most trusted friend. They had studied for grueling finals together, shared countless late-night slices of greasy pizza, and had even awkwardly almost kissed once during a snowstorm. But as college ended, adult life had aggressively pulled them in entirely different directions. She had ultimately chosen the charming, ambitious Ethan, foolishly believing that his brand of loud security was inherently safer than the quiet uncertainty of Noah's startup dreams. Now, staring at her phone, total uncertainty felt like her absolute only chance at escape. She quickly typed a short reply. 5 tense minutes later, the door to the coffee shop opened, and Noah walked into the Starbucks. He looked significantly older now, much more polished and refined. He wore a stunning, tailored dark gray suit, a crisp, perfectly ironed white shirt, and a silver Mont Blanc pen was clipped neatly in his breast pocket. Massive corporate success suited him perfectly, but his warm, genuine smile hadn't changed one bit. It was still incredibly warm, unshakably steady, and wonderfully sincere. "Hey," he said softly, smoothly pulling out the metal chair across from her. "You look incredibly tired. Liv, what's going on with you?" For a long, agonizing moment, Olivia simply couldn't speak. The sheer, unexpected kindness in his gentle voice aggressively cracked something heavy and dark inside her, and she had to blink incredibly hard to keep from breaking down. Crying in public. Noah didn't push her. He waited patiently and quietly, simply folding his hands on the table in that calm, familiar way she vividly remembered from their youth. She took a deep, shaky inhalation and finally told him absolutely everything. She didn't recount it dramatically, and she didn't speak bitterly. She just laid it out honestly. She told him about the lonely late nights, the endless web of lies, the rose lipstick on his collar, the cruel whispers she overheard at the gala, the archived napkin sketch, the divorce attorney, and the terrifying mountain of evidence piling up around her like a massive, dark storm she had never asked for. When she finally finished speaking, Noah sat back heavily in his chair, completely silent for a long moment, processing the betrayal. "Olivia," he finally said, his voice dropping incredibly low with suppressed anger. "You really should have called me so much sooner." She let out a weak, self-deprecating laugh, wiping her eyes. I really didn't want to drag anyone else into this massive mess. Drag me? Noah shook his head firmly, his eyes locking onto hers. You completely forget. I have always wanted to be in your life. Her pale cheeks instantly warmed. She looked down and away, nervously gripping her hot coffee cup. She was absolutely not in the emotional headspace to be ready for anything beyond basic survival right now. But those specific, validating words, they deeply softened a part of her heart she'd honestly thought was dead and gone forever. Before she could even attempt to respond, Noah leaned intensely forward across the small table. Live. Your app idea. The core concept on that napkin. Sketch. It is incredibly good. Really, really good. And if Ethan's company is actually building their flagship product on it, you are currently sitting on top of something incredibly powerful. She swallowed hard, overwhelmed. So my attorney and everyone keeps saying. But here's exactly what the lawyers won't say to you, Noah continued, his eyes burning with visionary intensity. You absolutely don't have to spend years in court fighting for tiny, miserable scraps of what's legally yours. You could simply build your own, vastly superior version. Make it better, make it cleaner, and keep it entirely independent. Olivia blinked in sheer shock. Me? Start an entire tech company? Why not? His smile was relatively small, but packed with absolute, unwavering certainty. Because you intuitively understand user experience significantly better than half the arrogant tech bros currently running development teams today. You're incredibly intuitive. You're wickedly smart. And frankly, Ethan never, ever deserved access to your mind. She laughed a highly nervous, breathy laugh. Noah, I'm absolutely not a CEO. Well, you definitely weren't meant to be a subservient wife to a dishonest, cheating man. Either, Noah said incredibly gently, but firmly. But you played the hell out of that part until it completely broke you. You can easily learn to play a new role that actually builds you up instead. Olivia stared deeply at him. She looked past his shoulder at the bustling, chaotic city moving rapidly behind the glass. And then she looked inward at the brand new life she still had a fighting chance to reclaim. A heavy, dark storm violently rumbled overhead, distant thunder aggressively, shaking the large coffee shop windows. Pedestrians outside rushed frantically inside the doors to escape the sudden, freezing drizzle. Olivia felt the very air in the room shift. It was cooler, significantly heavier, and absolutely full of impending change. Noah reached into his sleek leather briefcase and slid a heavy, embossed business card across the table toward her. It wasn't his standard, personal networking card. It was an exclusive VIP access card to his private building. Come to my executive office this week, he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Let me personally show you exactly how we can systematically turn what he stole from you into a massive empire that belongs entirely to you. Olivia picked up the heavy card, holding it delicately between her trembling fingers. For the very first time in agonizing months, she felt something incredibly solid and steady take root inside her. It was a brand new beginning. It was a powerful, loyal new ally. It was a brilliantly clear new path. And for the first time in years, she knew she absolutely wasn't walking it alone. For the vast majority of her adult life, Olivia Parker had absolutely never been the kind of dramatic woman who drastically reinvented herself after a crisis. She didn't impulsively chop off her hair after a bad heartbreak. She didn't rack up debt buying entirely new, flashy wardrobes after getting a promotion. She certainly didn't drown her heavy feelings in cheap alcohol and reckless, impulsive decisions. She simply survived the world by remaining incredibly, stubbornly steady. But immediately after the profound meeting with Noah, something fundamental inside her core violently shifted. It didn't happen wildly. It wasn't reckless. But it happened with a quiet, terrifying determination that felt incredibly foreign, yet undeniably powerful. It began very subtly. The very next morning, Olivia intentionally woke up an hour before her alarm went off. She pulled her dark hair up into a messy, loose bun, walked through the house, and forcefully opened every single window in the townhouse she still uncomfortably shared with Ethan, letting the freezing, biting, cold autumn air violently rush inside the stuffy house. Felt exactly like letting something toxic and stale finally leave her chest. She stood silently in the doorway of the massive walk-in closet, her eyes rapidly scanning the long, neat rows of clothes she hadn't touched or worn in months. Most of the hanging garments directly reflected the timid, small woman she'd intentionally become just to please Ethan. There were incredibly soft, shapeless sweaters, highly conservative, high-neck blouses, muted, depressing colors, and overly practical flat shoes. They were exactly the clothes of someone who desperately didn't want to take up any space in the world. But securely tucked away in the dark, forgotten back corner of the closet was a stunning dress she'd bought on a whim years earlier. It was a highly fitted, beautifully tailored black sheath dress that she absolutely never wore because Ethan had once casually, cruelly remarked that it looked entirely too bold and desperate for you, Liv. She slowly took it off the velvet hanger, touched the smooth, expensive fabric, and immediately felt her stomach flutter with nervous energy. She took off her robe and put it on. It fit her body absolutely perfectly. She stood and stared deeply at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The striking woman staring back in the glass absolutely didn't look weak or fragile. She looked exactly like someone who had just survived something incredibly brutal, but stubbornly refused to be destroyed by it. She wasn't entirely reborn just yet, but she was finally, gloriously waking up. That exact same afternoon, she confidently booked a long overdue appointment at a small, highly rated, independent salon deep in Brooklyn. It was the specific, kind of welcoming place with warm, flattering lighting and intuitive stylists who talk to you like a trusted sister rather than just another paying client. When the edgy, tattooed stylist asked her what she wanted done, Olivia surprised even herself with her answer. I want to look exactly like someone who has completely stopped apologizing for existing. The seasoned stylist paused with her scissors, met her eyes in the mirror, and nodded with profound, silent understanding. It was the distinct look of recognition, only women who have been broken recognizing each other in the wild. They chopped off the dead ends, trimmed her hair significantly, expertly shaped it, and added soft, voluminous layers that beautifully framed her face. It was nothing overly dramatic, and nothing that screamed desperately for attention. It was just enough to make her look like she finally remembered she was allowed to feel beautiful. Immediately after leaving the salon, she walked confidently into a trendy boutique nearby. It wasn't a snobby, overpriced luxury brand. It was just a cool local shop filled with racks of clothes that felt vibrant and alive. She decisively bought 2 stunning, tailored dresses, a sharp blazer with structured shoulder pads that instantly made her look significantly stronger, and a pair of fierce, black stiletto heels that clicked loudly and confidently on the hardwood floor. She absolutely didn't buy the most expensive items in the store. She didn't need to. She was actively building her armor quietly, not performing for anyone's approval. On the long train ride home, she impulsively stopped by an independent bookstore. She didn't even know exactly why. She aimlessly wandered through the quiet, dusty aisles until a specific spine title forcefully caught her eye. Women Who Run with the Wolves. She picked it up, flipping through the thick pages filled with ancient stories about aggressively reclaiming feminine power, trusting primal intuition, and rebuilding lost identity. She bought the book immediately, along with a thick, leather-bound journal and a heavy black fountain pen. When she got back home, she sat at the kitchen island and wrote the very first page in the journal. I honestly don't know exactly who I am anymore without Ethan. But I am finally going to find out. Later that exact night, Ethan actually came home early from the office. It was incredibly rare for him. He confidently walked into the living room, loosening his tie, and completely froze in his tracks when he saw her. She was standing there confidently in the sharp black dress, her new, soft hair framing her face, her posture entirely different, her energy completely shifted. Wow, he said incredibly slowly, his eyes wide as he looked her up and down. What exactly is the big occasion tonight? Olivia held his gaze perfectly, without shrinking back an inch. Nothing. I just felt like getting dressed up and looking good for myself. Ethan frowned deeply, instantly confused and put off. He absolutely wasn't used to dealing with a version of her he didn't emotionally control. Is this weirdness about the other night? I already told you. People just love to gossip. At those galas. It didn't mean absolutely anything. Olivia didn't take the bait to argue. She didn't offer a tearful explanation. She didn't pathetically beg for him to love her. She simply turned away, picked up her new book, and confidently walked right past him. For the very first time in their relationship, he felt something cold and terrifying that he hadn't felt in years, absolute uncertainty. Because no matter how many naive women he'd successfully charmed, how many ruthless corporate deals he'd expertly closed, or how many complex lies he'd flawlessly told, he had absolutely never seen Olivia look like someone actively preparing to leave. The submissive version of herself that so perfectly served his ego. He didn't know it yet, but her magnificent rebirth had already begun. For several agonizing days following Olivia's quiet, striking transformation, Ethan Reed moved hesitantly through their shared townhouse exactly like a confused man walking into a dark room where all the familiar furniture had been maliciously rearranged. Nothing looked overtly different at a quick first glance. Yet, something in the very air felt undeniably, terrifyingly off. Olivia simply didn't argue with him anymore. She didn't tearfully beg for long-winded explanations about his schedule. She didn't anxiously ask where he'd been, or why he hadn't bothered to come home until 2 a.m., smelling of liquor. She was perfectly polite, incredibly calm, and unshakably composed. And absolutely nothing on earth terrified a narcissist like Ethan more than a woman who no longer reacted to his manipulation. On a rainy Tuesday evening, he burst aggressively through the front door, carrying the heavy, unmistakable smell of expensive whiskey and sweet rooftop bar perfume on his coat. He loosened his silk tie highly dramatically, clearly, arrogantly expecting Olivia to run over and anxiously ask where he'd been all night. She didn't. She sat peacefully at the kitchen table with a steaming mug of ginger tea, deeply engrossed in reading her new book, a silver pen tucked casually behind one ear. "You're actually still up," he said loudly, dropping his heavy leather briefcase onto the granite counter with a loud thud to get her attention. "Mom," she replied softly, absolutely not looking up from the page. Ethan waited awkwardly. The heavy silence stretched out uncomfortably in the room. It was an incredibly long, exhausting day, he added, fishing for sympathy. Still nothing. She casually turned a page. He shifted his weight, growing visibly annoyed by her lack of fawning. "You're acting awfully quiet lately, Liv." She highlighted a passage in the book. "I've just been very busy." "Busy doing what exactly?" he scoffed condescendingly. "You don't even." Olivia looked up sharply from the book, her eyes locking onto his, and Ethan's. Cruel words literally died on his tongue. There was something terrifyingly new in her dark eyes that he hadn't ever seen before. It absolutely wasn't anger. And it wasn't sadness. It was pure, unadulterated clarity. It was a specific kind of chilling clarity that made his stomach drop as he suddenly became aware. He had massively miscalculated something very, very important. "I don't what?" she asked incredibly softly, her tone lethal. Ethan opened and closed his mouth like a fish. He honestly didn't know how to safely respond. Olivia stood up gracefully, walked smoothly to the fridge, poured herself a cold glass of water, and confidently walked right past him again. She wasn't actively avoiding him, she was just utterly, completely uninterested in his existence. It unsettled his massive ego so deeply that he instinctively followed her into the living room like a pathetic, needy shadow. "Are you mad at me about something?" he demanded, his voice rising. "No," she said simply, settling comfortably back onto the plush couch. "Then why the hell are you acting like this?" His voice sharpened into a defensive bark. "Did someone put stupid ideas in your head?" Olivia almost laughed out loud. Ideas in her head? He spoke as if she didn't possess her own brilliant mind, her own voice, her own absolute agency. But she kept her icy calm, because she knew exactly what was coming next. And maintaining control mattered. "Ethan," she said, carefully marking her page with a finger and closing the book. "I need to ask you something important." He exhaled dramatically, rolling his eyes as if preparing himself to endure yet another exhausting emotional tantrum he could easily dismiss. "Okay. What is it?" "Now." She looked him straight in the eyes, her gaze piercing right through his facade. "Who exactly is Brooke Sullivan to you?" It was the absolute, deafening quiet in the room that made the simple question so incredibly deadly. Ethan completely froze. It was just a tiny flicker of panic, just long enough for her to catch it before he recovered. Then he seamlessly put on his absolute best, award-winning performance. "What? Brooke? She's just a new junior consultant on the team. Why are you?" "Please, don't lie to me," Olivia said incredibly gently, cutting him off. He blinked rapidly, completely stunned by the unnerving softness in her tone. She absolutely wasn't yelling at him. She wasn't crying hysterically. She wasn't throwing things or wildly accusing him. She was simply stating an undeniable fact. "Olivia, you're being completely paranoid again," he snapped, going on the offensive. "People in the office talk. People love to exaggerate things. Don't embarrass yourself by believing pathetic corporate gossip." She set her book slowly and deliberately down onto the glass coffee table. "Ethan," she said, her voice unwavering, "I saw the photos." A heavy beat of dead silence filled the room. "What photos?" His voice actually cracked. Not with moral guilt, but with the sheer, visceral terror of finally being caught in the act. "The photos taken of you at the Beverly Hills Hotel," she clarified calmly. "You were supposedly out there on a highly important, solitary business trip. And yet, there you were by the pool, all over her." The remaining color completely drained from his arrogant face, leaving him looking sickly pale. Olivia continued, her voice incredibly quiet and steady. "You didn't even bother hiding the affair very well. It was out in public. Wealthy people actively Whispered about it behind my back at the gala. You profoundly humiliated me. Ethan. And you didn't even care enough about me to try and protect my dignity. He opened his mouth to formulate a lie. But Olivia simply held up a single hand. And he instantly stopped speaking. You absolutely don't need to try and explain it away, she said. I already know the entire truth. Ethan swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Olivia, please. We can definitely work through this. Married couples successfully recover from these kinds of things all the time. You've just been incredibly emotional lately. Because of the miscarriage. Maybe we both just need. She stood up abruptly, her presence commanding the room, cutting him off with a chilling calm he simply couldn't comprehend. Do not do that, she said, her voice dropping an octave. Do not ever call me emotional to invalidate me. Do not try to twist this massive betrayal into something small. And do not ever pretend you didn't knowingly, maliciously, destroy what we built. Ethan took a desperate step toward her, his hands raised in surrender. Liv. Please. I know I made huge mistakes, but I love you. No, she said incredibly softly, shaking her head. You only love the quiet, subservient version of me that never asked you for absolutely anything. He froze in his tracks. And that weak version of me, she whispered fiercely, absolutely does not exist anymore. Ethan's breath violently hitched in his chest as he suddenly realized something utterly horrifying. For the very first time in the entire history of their marriage, Olivia absolutely wasn't pleading with him for love or attention. She was actively preparing. She was preparing for something he had absolutely never imagined she possessed the strength to actually do. And the heavy, sinking dread in his chest told him that he was already far too late to stop her. The large townhouse felt strangely, eerily quiet the next morning, almost as if the very walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something massive to happen. Olivia woke up long before dawn, completely unable to shake the uneasy, electric heaviness sitting squarely in her chest. The intense confrontation from the night before kept relentlessly replaying in her mind on a loop. Ethan's pathetic lies, his classic narcissistic deflection, the exact sickening moment he had tried to call her emotional like it was some kind of fatal character flaw. But the specific part that stayed with her the most wasn't his obvious deception. It was his genuine, raw fear. It was that small, trembling flicker of sheer panic she'd clearly seen in his eyes when she said the damning word. Photos. She pulled on a thick sweater and made her way quietly downstairs. The early morning sun was just beginning to seep weakly through the kitchen blinds, dusting the room with a soft, pale gold glow. She poured herself a strong cup of coffee and sat down at the wooden table. She opened her laptop and began scrolling, not to check for desperate, apologetic messages from Ethan, but to open the heavily encrypted, hidden folder she'd meticulously created weeks earlier on her desktop. Inside were screenshots, automated email notifications, complex financial records, calendar overlaps. It was his entire history of lies, perfectly preserved in digital amber. One by one, she systematically reviewed the files, steadying her breathing with each click. This absolutely wasn't born of jealous obsession anymore. This was hard, undeniable evidence. It was the exact evidence she would desperately need, because today she had her highly anticipated second meeting with the ruthless Park Avenue attorney. By 8:30 a.m., Olivia was fully dressed. Her hair was softly curled, her sharp new blazer buttoned perfectly. Staring in the mirror, she absolutely didn't look like a pathetic wife on the verge of an emotional breaking point. She looked exactly like a powerful woman actively preparing for an all-out war. The elite law firm's cavernous marble lobby felt significantly less intimidating to her this time around. She sat confidently across the desk from her seasoned attorney, pushed the thick manila folder across the polished wood, and calmly said, "I am officially ready to proceed." The attorney smiled warmly. It was just a small, professional smile, but it was more than enough to say, "You are so much stronger than you think." They spent an hour reviewing absolutely everything in the folder. Then, the attorney leaned forward, interlacing her fingers, and asked the $1,000,000 question. Do you have absolute, undeniable proof that the initial product flow design was entirely yours? Olivia nodded confidently. Opening her laptop, she quickly pulled up the old Gmail account, clicked on the restored cloud file, and slowly turned the bright screen around to face the lawyer. The scanned image of the crumpled Starbucks napkin, clearly time-stamped from years ago and covered in her distinct handwriting, stared right back at them. "That," the attorney said, lightly tapping her manicured fingernail against the laptop screen, "is more than enough legal leverage to completely shake his entire company to its very foundation." Olivia inhaled deeply, desperately trying to mentally process the sheer, staggering magnitude of the weapon she currently held in her hands. "Do you really, truly think so?" "No," the attorney corrected her, her eyes flashing with predatory excitement. "I absolutely know so." So, they spent the next several hours meticulously crafting a devastating legal plan. They drafted aggressive document requests, formal cease and desist letters, comprehensive asset checks, and the brutal initial drafts of the divorce papers. The tedious process was emotionally brutal, draining, and exhausting, but it felt incredibly necessary. Olivia felt exactly like a snake, painfully shedding a tight, suffocating skin she'd been trapped inside for years. Paper by paper, signature by signature, she aggressively reclaimed stolen pieces of her own soul. After the exhausting meeting concluded, she stepped outside the building into the crisp, biting fall air. She absolutely wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She wasn't doubting her choices. For the first time in years, She felt completely, vibrantly awake. As she walked confidently toward the subway entrance, her phone buzzed loudly in her pocket. A text message from a completely unknown number appeared brightly on the screen. "You absolutely don't know me, but you desperately need to hear this. Ethan has been loudly bragging at the office that you're totally losing your mind, and that he has the divorce completely under his control. I just thought you should know." There was no name attached, no context provided, just the ugly, undeniable truth. Olivia stopped walking on the crowded sidewalk. Surprisingly, the cruel message didn't hurt her feelings at all. Not anymore. Instead, it perfectly clarified something she had foolishly ignored for entirely too long. Ethan absolutely wasn't acting scared last night because he genuinely regretted hurting her. He was acting scared because he was rapidly losing his total control over her. She tucked her phone safely away in her bag and continued walking down the concrete steps into the busy subway station, seamlessly weaving through the morning crowd. The loud train screeched violently to a stop, and she stepped inside the car, gripping the cold metal pole tightly as the heavy doors closed. People packed tightly around her mindlessly scrolled their phones, listened to loud music through headphones, and read the morning newspapers. Absolutely. Nobody in the car knew her story. Nobody knew that her heart had been brutally broken, painstakingly stitched back together, and then callously broken again. But they also didn't know that she was currently carrying something incredibly powerful inside her leather bag. Truth. Documentation. Proof. Absolute proof of his betrayal. Proof of his corporate theft. And proof of exactly who Ethan Reed truly was behind his tailored suits and his fake, weaponized charm. He had massively, fatally underestimated her. Tonight, she would dutifully return home to a man who arrogantly believed she was quietly crumbling into dust. But she absolutely wasn't. She was actively preparing the battlefield. And very soon, he would learn exactly how incredibly dangerous it was to underestimate a woman who had finally reached her absolute breaking point and fearlessly stepped past it. Because Olivia was absolutely no longer waiting around for a hero to save her. She was actively building the exact weapon that would set her completely free. The following week unfolded exactly like a massive, dark storm Olivia never saw coming on the radar. It all started quietly. Entirely too quietly. Ethan began acting strangely, almost sickeningly attentive. He started leaving little, overly affectionate post-it notes on the stainless steel fridge that said fake things like, "Have a great day. Live. Let's get a nice dinner tonight." He acted exactly as if a few cheap compliments could magically erase the agonizing months of gaslighting and lies between them. He surprisingly came home earlier from work, brought her a bouquet of overpriced flowers once, and even offered to cook dinner. But Olivia intimately knew much better now. She clearly saw the sudden, drastic, behavioral shift for exactly what it was, sheer terror expertly disguised as Marital affection. He keenly sensed her actively pulling away from his orbit. He sensed the very ground beneath his feet changing. And when narcissistic men like Ethan Reed felt their absolute power slipping away, they never offered genuine apologies. They only strategized. 2 tense nights later, as Olivia sat alone in the bedroom silently preparing her legal documents, she noticed something highly alarming. One of her thick manila folders was completely missing from her bag. It was the specific, crucial folder containing all the printed financial spreadsheets and bank records. She frantically dug through her desk drawers, sifted aggressively through the closet shelves, and emptied her tote bag onto the bed. Nothing. Her resting pulse instantly spiked into overdrive. She hurried quickly downstairs to the kitchen. Ethan stood casually leaning against the granite counter, holding the missing folder in his hand. "Were you looking for this?" he asked, his voice syrupy smooth, dripping with condescension. Olivia froze completely. "Give that back to me right now." He smirked, casually waving the thick stack of papers in the air. "You've certainly been incredibly busy, haven't you? Hiring expensive lawyers, digging through ancient Gmail archives, demanding asset inventories. It's really quite impressive. Liv. Truly." Her stomach violently dropped into her shoes. He absolutely wasn't just angry. He was deeply, cruelly amused by her efforts. "Ethan, those papers are completely private," she demanded. "You're my wife," he snapped aggressively, his smile vanishing. "Absolutely. Nothing you have in this house is private from me." The cruel, controlling words sliced her like jagged glass. She stepped forward, bravely. "I said, give them back." But Ethan shook his head, looking at her with an expression she had absolutely never seen on his face before. It was something incredibly dark, cold, and highly calculating. "You actually think you can blindside me like this?" he spat. "You think you can just hire a lawyer and casually take half of absolutely everything I built with my own 2 hands?" "That you built," Olivia whispered, completely stunned by his sheer audacity. "You wouldn't even have your flagship product without my idea." His strong jaw clenched tightly. A stupid little sketch drawn on a dirty napkin doesn't miraculously make you a tech genius. Olivia, I am the one who did the actual hard work. I made all the elite connections. I put in the agonizing hours. At the office, you just helped a little. Helped. He threw the word at her as if she hadn't unconditionally poured the best years of her life into supporting him. As if her brilliant mind had absolutely zero market value. As if her massive personal sacrifices were just irrelevant background noise in his grand, epic success story. Olivia felt her chest physically tighten with rage, but she fought to keep her voice perfectly even. "Ethan, give me the folder. Now." Instead of complying, he turned his back and walked deliberately toward the roaring fireplace in the living room. She moved instantly, pure panic surging through her veins. "Ethan, don't you dare!" With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed the entire, irreplaceable folder directly into the open flames. "No!" Olivia screamed, her voice raw, broken, and desperate. She lunged violently toward the stone hearth, desperately trying to reach in and pull the burning papers out, but Ethan aggressively grabbed her arm, using his superior strength to hold her back. "Stop it!" he shouted angrily. "Olivia, for God's sake, calm down." "Let go of me," she cried, twisting violently until she broke free of his iron grip. But it was already entirely too late. The crucial papers were actively burning, the edges curling black, the printed numbers and evidence rapidly melting into gray ash. Her hours of agonizing work, her hard-fought legal leverage gone in seconds. She fell heavily to her knees on the rug, staring helplessly as the hungry flames eagerly devoured the very last sheet of paper. Thick smoke stung her eyes, making them water, but it was absolutely nothing compared to the profound agony currently ripping through her chest. "You can't legally do this," she whispered brokenly. Ethan exhaled sharply, running a stressed hand through his hair. Suddenly, playing the victim. "Liv, look, we are both just incredibly stressed right now. But you absolutely don't need blood-sucking lawyers involved. You don't need whatever ridiculous rebellion this is. Let's just forget all this nonsense. We can easily start fresh together." Fresh? As if he hadn't literally just destroyed the one tangible thing she desperately needed to successfully stand against him in court. Olivia stood up incredibly shakily, her breath trembling in her lungs. "You literally just burned my work." "It's our work," he corrected her, his tone icy and controlling. "And I am simply protecting both of us from a messy, public mistake." "By lying," she shot back furiously. "By cheating on me. By violently manipulating my reality until I barely even recognize myself anymore." His handsome face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You're being overly dramatic." Again, the word hit her like a physical slap across the face. Dramatic. It was the exact weaponized word insecure men constantly use to silence women, to minimize their profound pain, and to effortlessly rewrite the truth to suit their ego. Olivia took a large step back away from him, hot tears completely blurring her vision. "I honestly don't even know who you are anymore." Ethan raised his chin arrogantly. "I am the only man in this house desperately trying to keep this marriage from completely falling apart." "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You are the exact reason it did." She violently grabbed her heavy winter coat and her car keys off the hook with shaking hands. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" Ethan demanded, stepping toward her. "Far away from you." And she walked straight out the front door, completely barefoot in the cold, not even realizing she hadn't put on shoes until she reached the freezing concrete of the driveway. She collapsed heavily against the side of her parked car, her entire body shaking uncontrollably, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Her physical evidence was completely gone. Her legal leverage was entirely destroyed. Her tiny sliver of hope was rapidly slipping through her freezing fingers. For the very first time in this entire ordeal, Olivia felt something truly, existentially terrifying. She wasn't just afraid that she would legally lose to Ethan in a courtroom. She was terrified that she might completely lose her own mind and herself in the grueling process. And that specific, overwhelming fear was almost enough to break her spirit completely. Olivia sat shivering inside her parked, freezing car. She rested her forehead heavily against the cold leather of the steering wheel, hot tears dripping silently onto her bare hands. The bitter, biting cold air aggressively bit at her exposed skin, but she was so numb she barely even felt it. Her hard-won evidence, her only real leverage, was completely gone, literally burned to ash. Right in front of her eyes, Ethan had knowingly crossed a line she didn't even realize existed in their marriage. It wasn't just a betrayal of vows anymore. It wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was active, malicious destruction. She didn't know exactly how long she sat there frozen in the dark. It could have been 10 minutes. It could have been an hour. Eventually, her phone buzzed loudly in her coat pocket. She completely ignored it at first. Then it buzzed again and again. Finally, with violently trembling fingers, she lifted the glowing screen. There were 3 missed calls from her sister Emma, 2 urgent texts from Noah, and 1 notification from a completely unknown number. She opened Noah's message first. "Olivia, are you safe right now? Please call me." She stared blankly at the screen as a second message popped up in real time. "I'm not very far from your house. Just say the word, and I will come get you right now." Her throat tightened painfully. She quickly typed a single, desperate word. "Yes." Exactly 15 minutes later, Noah's sleek car pulled up smoothly right beside hers on the dark street. He stepped out of the vehicle immediately, deep worry etched plainly across his face, and knelt down directly beside her open driver's side door. "Liv," he said incredibly softly, his voice full of warmth. "Come here." The exact moment she felt his strong, safe arms wrapped securely around her shaking shoulders, absolutely every single bit of strength she'd been desperately holding on to completely gave out. She sobbed violently into his chest. It was a messy, broken, guttural grieving for every single piece of her life she'd foolishly convinced herself was worth saving. "It's completely gone," she choked out through her tears. "He burned absolutely everything. All the financial documents, all the printed spreadsheets, everything I worked so hard on." Noah didn't flinch. He didn't try to shush her or rush her through the pain. He just held her securely, letting her cry until her violent sobs slowly reduced to quiet, exhausted hiccups. Then, He very gently lifted her chin so she had to. Look at him. Is that really absolutely everything you had? He asked calmly. Yes, she whispered in despair. He completely destroyed it all. I have absolutely nothing left to fight with. Noah's eyes softened with profound empathy, but there was a fierce glint of determination behind them. Liv. Look right at me. She did. You have significantly more leverage than you think you do. She shook her head weakly in denial. No, Noah. I really don't. Yes, he said firmly, standing up and pulling her to her feet. You absolutely do. Because there is something very important that you don't know yet. He opened his warm passenger door for her. Come on. Get in. There is someone you desperately need to talk to tonight. Olivia didn't have the energy to argue. She was far too emotionally exhausted to even protest. She climbed into his heated car, leaning her heavy head exhausted against the cool glass window as the glittering city lights blurred past them in streaks of gold and white. They drove in silence to a quiet, retro diner located deep in Brooklyn, the specific kind of all-night place with neon signs that looked like it hadn't changed its decor since the late 80s. Inside, sitting entirely alone in a dark corner booth, was a woman nervously stirring a cup of hot tea. Olivia completely froze in her tracks the moment she recognized the profile. Brooke Sullivan, the mistress. Her heart violently slammed against her ribs in sheer panic. She turned to leave. No. Absolutely not. I am not doing this. Olivia, Noah said incredibly gently, blocking the door. Just listen to her. Please. Brooke stood up quickly from the booth, her eyes wide, immense guilt woven deeply into every single inch of her pale expression. Liv. Olivia. I promise. I am not here to hurt you. I swear to God. Olivia's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. You already did. Brooke nodded rapidly, genuine tears burning in her green eyes. I know I did. And I am so incredibly sorry. I am absolutely not asking you for your forgiveness tonight. I desperately need to tell you something. Something you legally deserve to know before you go to court. Olivia walked over and sat down very slowly in the vinyl booth. Her posture incredibly guarded, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Noah sat securely right beside her, acting as a solid, grounding anchor she didn't even realize she desperately needed until he was there. Brooke took a deep, shaky breath, her hands trembling around her teacup. Ethan. He's lying to you. And not just about the stupid affair. He's lying to the board about absolutely everything. Olivia stared at her, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. Be highly specific. Brooke looked down at her shaking hands in shame. He constantly told Senior people at work that you were severely mentally unstable, just so no one would ever question him if you spoke out. He openly bragged to me about stealing your app idea. He is actively planning to testify under oath that you had absolutely nothing to do with the design. Olivia froze. the sheer depth of the betrayal taking her breath away. Brooke continued, her voice trembling with fear. And the absolute worst part, he is aggressively hiding massive financial misconduct at the firm. He's been actively manipulating the quarterly numbers, padding the revenue reports to secure his promotion. People at the top are starting to notice the discrepancies, but he is expertly planning to blame you for hacking the files if he gets caught. Olivia's blood ran completely ice cold. He's going to frame me for a federal crime. Noah leaned in across the table. Brooke has something else to show you. Something that changes absolutely everything about this case. Very slowly, Brooke reached into her designer purse, pulled out her iPhone, opened the voice memos app, and pressed play. Ethan's unmistakable voice instantly filled the quiet booth. It was crystal clear, terrifyingly cold, and dripping with pure arrogance. Olivia's way too emotional and fragile to ever actually prove anything in court. The app idea is legally mine now. And even if she magically finds the guts to talk, absolutely no one on the board will believe a housewife over me. I'll make damn sure she looks completely unstable to the judge. If she pushes me on this, I'll absolutely bury her. Olivia's breath violently caught in her throat. Her hands began to tremble so violently she had to press them flat against the table. Brooke's voice broke as the recording ended. I secretly recorded that the exact night he said it. I naively thought he'd protect me if things went south. I was completely wrong. When I confronted him about the fake numbers, he threatened to throw me under the bus, too. That's when I finally realized what kind of monster he really is. Olivia's dark eyes filled with tears, but absolutely not with sorrow this time. They filled with something significantly deeper, more dangerous, a rising, unquenchable fire. This recording was infinitely more than just proof of a stolen idea. This was the ultimate, devastating weapon that Ethan Reed absolutely never saw coming. For the very first time since the nightmare began, Olivia straightened her shoulders perfectly, held her head high, and met Brooke's tearful eyes with absolute clarity. Thank you, she said incredibly quietly, her voice ringing with newfound power. You just changed absolutely everything. And for the very first time, the massive fight ahead didn't just feel possible. It felt totally winnable. The highly anticipated night of the annual Tech Innovation Gala finally arrived, bringing with it the specific kind of crisp, freezing Manhattan air that felt electrically charged, exactly like something massive was waiting just beneath the surface, ready to break loose. The exclusive, invite-only event was held at the legendary Plaza Hotel. Its grand, dripping crystal chandeliers glowed brilliantly like captured constellations across the massive, vaulted ballroom ceiling. Hundreds of powerful journalists, billionaire CEOs, wealthy venture investors, and the rising stars of the global fintech world drifted arrogantly across the polished marble floors in flawlessly tailored tuxedos and shimmering, expensive designer dresses. It was the exact kind of ruthless, elite room where global reputations were made in an instant and permanently destroyed just as fast. Ethan Reed confidently walked through the heavy double doors, feeling utterly, completely invincible. He wore a brand new, custom-tailored black tuxedo that fit him like armor, and a massive, gleaming Patek Philippe watch rested arrogantly on his wrist. Beside him stood Brooke, dutifully playing the part of the adoring partner one absolute last time, though her perfectly painted smile expertly hid a devastating truth that Ethan had absolutely no idea she carried, safely secured in her iPhone. The moment they entered the grand hall, paparazzi cameras flashed brilliantly. Wealthy investors eagerly lined up to shake Ethan's hand. Senior board members clapped him enthusiastically on the back. "This is absolutely our banner year, Ethan," one executive boomed over the music. "You'll officially be named COO by the summer. That massive product demo you're presenting next month? It's an absolute game changer for the market." Ethan soaked up the lavish praise like oxygen to a starving man. He had absolutely no idea that he was currently breathing in his very last moments of corporate power. Meanwhile, just outside the Grand Hotel entrance, a sleek, unmarked black town car pulled up quietly to the curb. Olivia confidently stepped out into the flashing lights. The elegant hem of her highly fitted, midnight blue silk gown caught the paparazzi lights beautifully. Her dark hair perfectly framed her face in soft, glamorous waves, and her posture was impeccably, terrifyingly steady. She looked absolutely nothing like the fragile, broken, crying woman Ethan had so callously dismissed just weeks earlier. Noah Carter stepped out and stood proudly beside her, offering his arm to her, not as a superior savior, but as a total equal. He wore a sharp, charcoal gray suit that was understated, yet unmistakably screamed old money and massive power. The exact moment the two of them walked through the grand double doors, loud conversations instantly dipped into silence. Hundreds of heads turned to stare. A massive, undeniable ripple of whispered shock moved rapidly through the wealthy crowd like a tidal wave. "Wait, is that Olivia Parker walking in with billionaire Noah Carter? I heard a rumor she's independently launching her own massive startup. Didn't she used to be married to Ethan Reed? Oh my God. Yes. This is going to get incredibly messy tonight." Olivia kept her chin held high, her pulse remaining perfectly steady. Every single step she took forward into the glittering room felt exactly like physically reclaiming a stolen piece of her own soul. From directly across the crowded room, Brooke saw her make her grand entrance. First, her breath audibly hitched. She wasn't scared, she was profoundly, deeply relieved. Ethan naturally followed Brooke's shocked gaze, and when he saw Olivia, he completely froze in his tracks. The crystal wine glass in his hand actually trembled. The arrogant, unwavering confidence in his spine violently faltered. For the very first time in his entire adult life, Ethan Reed looked incredibly, pathetically small. Olivia didn't halt her stride when their eyes finally met across the room. She didn't flinch. She didn't glare. She simply walked smoothly and gracefully right past him, her hand resting lightly on Noah's strong arm. The sheer, unbothered distance she displayed stung Ethan's massive ego like burning fire. Desperate to maintain his dominance, he stepped into her path and forced a loud, fake laugh. Liv, what on earth are you doing here at an industry event? Olivia stopped walking just long enough to give him a polite, chilling smile. It was polite in the exact same terrifying way that winter ice is polite right before it freezes a lake completely solid. I am simply living my life. Ethan, she said incredibly softly. Ethan's jaw tightened in fury. You absolutely can't be seen here with him. You don't belong in this. But she was already gone. She had seamlessly slipped away from him. Instantly. Swallowed into a powerful, elite circle of eager investors and top-tier executives who were absolutely desperate to speak with her. Noah confidently introduced her to the crowd as the brilliant founder and CEO of Parker Ledger, her brand new startup. Her original vision. Her undeniable brilliance. Important people eagerly asked her complex technical questions. They listened intently when she spoke with authority. They admired her business acumen genuinely, not performatively. It was absolutely everything Ethan had callously stolen from her, and now she positively glowed with the power of it. The ultimate turning point of the night came during the highly anticipated keynote presentation. The giant digital screens above the stage lit up brightly, proudly displaying innovative slides from several rising tech companies. Ethan stood near the front row, adjusting his tie, arrogantly expecting his firm to be called to the stage for their upcoming product announcement. Instead, the booming voice of the announcer echoed through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, we are incredibly proud to spotlight a revolutionary new fintech platform, a company that is single-handedly democratizing digital security and financial access through brilliant, user-centered design. Please join me in welcoming Parker Ledger. Olivia's sleek, modern corporate logo instantly filled the massive 30-foot screens. The entire ballroom erupted. There were loud gasps, thunderous applause, frantic whispers, and paparazzi cameras flashing relentlessly like a lightning storm. The color completely and instantly drained from Ethan's arrogant face, leaving him looking sickly pale. Brooke casually took a large step back away from him, her expression entirely unreadable and cold. Noah proudly led Olivia up the stairs and onto the brightly lit stage. As she confidently approached the clear glass podium, she felt a strange, profound calm settle entirely over her spirit. It was a fierce strength shaped by brutal survival, and a sharp clarity shaped by the absolute truth. She spoke to the crowd with incredible poise, undeniable confidence, and sharp intelligence. She absolutely didn't mention Ethan's name once. She didn't drop a single hint about the betrayal. She didn't need to. Her massive, Undeniable success was her ultimate, silent revenge. But fate, it seemed, wasn't quite done with Ethan Reed yet. As the deafening applause finally faded and Olivia stepped down, two severe-looking men dressed in dark, unassuming suits approached Ethan very quietly near the exit. One of them smoothly flipped open a leather wallet, flashing a federal badge. "Mr. Reed, we desperately need to discuss some massive inconsistencies in your corporate financial disclosures. Privately." The remaining color completely melted away from Ethan's terrified face. Brooke briefly caught Olivia's eye through the crowd, giving her the absolute faintest, confirming nod. It had officially begun. And for the very first time in his life, Ethan felt the crushing, devastating consequences of the fragile world he had aggressively built on a foundation of lies. The exact moment the two stern compliance officers approached Ethan, the entire glittering atmosphere around him violently shifted, exactly like an expensive crystal glass of champagne cracking slowly in slow motion. Just mere minutes earlier, he had been the undisputed golden boy of the gala, aggressively shaking hands with billionaires, confidently posing for PR photos, and loudly bragging to anyone who would listen about the visionary product he supposedly built from scratch. Now, highly toxic, scandalous whispers followed him like dark shadows as the two unsmiling officers firmly guided him by the elbows toward a quiet, isolated back hallway. "Sir," one of the men said grimly, shutting the heavy door behind them to block out the party noise. "We have substantial, highly credible concerns regarding heavily altered financial reports directly connected to your specific department." Ethan tried desperately to laugh it off, using his classic, weaponized charm. "This must simply be a massive misunderstanding. Gentlemen, I am actually the executive who exposed those minor irregularities to the board last week." The lead officer raised a highly skeptical eyebrow. "Our forensic digital records explicitly show that your personal, encrypted login credentials were the ones actively used to make the massive financial alterations. Then someone maliciously hacked my account," Ethan argued, his voice rising in panic. "Mr. Reed," the other officer cut in, his voice dead flat, "we highly advise you to completely stop speaking without legal counsel present." Ethan's mouth snapped violently shut. His racing heartbeat thundered so loudly. In his ears he could barely hear the music from the ballroom. For the very first time in his privileged life, true, unadulterated panic slid ice-cold directly into his bloodstream. Meanwhile, back out in the sprawling ballroom, Olivia watched the dramatic scene unfold from a safe distance. She wasn't smiling in triumph. She wasn't petty or gloating. She simply observed the destruction of her abuser, steady, incredibly composed, and almost slightly mournful for the man he could have been. This absolutely wasn't about petty revenge anymore. It was strictly about truth, justice, and universal balance. Noah stepped quietly up beside her, his voice low and comforting. Are you okay? Watching this, I honestly thought I'd feel incredibly satisfied, she admitted softly, staring at the closed hallway door. But honestly, mostly, I just feel entirely free. Her calm gaze drifted casually across the crowded room to where Brooke stood, entirely alone near the bar, her bare shoulders stiff, her green eyes looking incredibly distant and haunted. Even from across the room, Olivia could clearly tell the younger woman was emotionally unraveling inside. Ethan had ruthlessly used her, too. He had manipulated her career, fed her lies, and violently threatened her silence. But tonight, Brooke had bravely chosen to break the toxic cycle, and Olivia respected her for that far more than she ever expected she could. Inside the claustrophobic hallway, Ethan tried desperately to regain his footing and control the narrative. Look, gentlemen, my soon-to-be ex-wife is incredibly vindictive. She has been severely mentally unstable for months following a tragedy. She is actively trying to sabotage my successful career out of jealousy. I can easily prove. The first federal officer casually clicked his pen. It's incredibly funny that you say that, Mr. Reed, because someone anonymously sent our division a highly disturbing audio file earlier tonight. Ethan's toxic blood literally turned to solid ice. The officer pulled out his phone and pressed play. Ethan's own arrogant, cruel voice instantly filled the echoing hallway. Olivia's way too emotional to ever prove anything. The idea was mine. If she pushes me, I'll absolutely bury her. Ethan lunged desperately for the phone in a blind panic. But the highly trained officers stepped back effortlessly, hands resting on their belts. That specific recording, the officer said incredibly calmly, sounds exactly like someone actively engaging in malicious corporate manipulation and illegal retaliation, not someone who is currently being sabotaged. Ethan literally felt the walls physically closing in on him. This is completely taken out of context, he protested wildly, sweating profusely. She is lying to you, the women in my life. The officer paused, narrowing his eyes. Women? Plural? Ethan completely froze again. He realized, horrifyingly and entirely too late, that in his blind panic, he had just accidentally admitted to something highly compromising that they hadn't even specifically asked him about yet. The two officers exchanged a long, knowing look. Mr. Reed, please come with us. They absolutely weren't officially arresting him just yet, but they were firmly moving him to a highly secure, discreet conference room upstairs to await formal, recorded questioning and the arrival of aggressive corporate legal counsel. Back inside the glittering ballroom, elite board members began murmuring furiously behind their hands. Powerful executives frowned deeply at their cell phones as push notifications rapidly lit up their screens with toxic rumors. Wealthy investors exchanged highly tense, panicked glances. One of Ethan's closest, most loyal corporate allies muttered loudly to a Colleague, this absolutely does not look good for the IPO. It was the official, glorious beginning of a very public, very permanent unraveling. Olivia didn't seek him out to gloat, and she didn't try to physically witness the final humiliation. She simply stepped gracefully away to a much quieter corner of the room, letting the chaotic noise of the gala wash harmlessly over her. As she finally exhaled a massive breath she felt she'd been painfully holding for years. She quietly thought about the terrible night she had found the pink lipstick on his shirt. She thought about the night she had cried entirely alone on the freezing bathroom floor. She thought about the horrific night he had maliciously burned her documents in the fireplace. She thought about the agonizing years she had spent intentionally shrinking herself down to absolutely nothing, just to make his fragile ego feel taller. And suddenly, something massive and heavy inside her soul finally loosened, and a crushing weight completely lifted off her chest forever. Noah approached her again, gently handing her a crystal glass of sparkling water with lime. "It's officially done," he said softly. She nodded, taking a sip. "It's finally starting." He studied her beautiful, calm face intently. "You handled the chaos tonight with significantly more grace than most people on Earth ever would." Olivia smiled faintly, looking out over the crowd. "Grace is exactly what kept me alive all these years, Noah, when blind rage would have easily killed me." A profound, beautiful silence settled comfortably between them. It was completely comfortable this time, not heavy with unsaid things. Across the massive ballroom, clueless people desperately tried pretending nothing major was happening, but absolutely every single whispered conversation eventually circled right back to the exact same shocking topic. Ethan Reed was caught. He was exposed. He was finished. And absolutely everyone in the industry knew it. Back in the isolated hallway, one officer stepped outside to make a secure phone call. Ethan sat completely alone at the long conference room table, breathing incredibly hard, sweating profusely through his expensive silk collar, his white-knuckled hands violently clutching the arms of his leather chair. He could clearly hear the distant, joyous applause echoing from the ballroom below, but he knew with absolute certainty that absolutely none of it was for him. For the very first time in his arrogant life, Ethan Reed truly understood exactly what it felt like to completely lose absolutely everything, and to know, deep down, that he completely deserved it. The morning immediately following the disastrous gala, the island of Manhattan felt remarkably different to Olivia Parker. It felt significantly quieter, vastly clearer, almost exactly as if the sprawling city itself had finally exhaled after anxiously holding its breath for entirely too long. She woke up peacefully in Noah's beautiful, sunlit guest room. The warm morning sunlight stretching gently across the crisp, white sheets. He had adamantly insisted she not return to her empty apartment that night. Not after the massive emotional shock and the public confrontation she had just bravely endured. She had readily agreed, not because she was weak and needed saving, but because she had finally, beautifully accepted that she absolutely didn't have to suffer through life alone anymore. For the very first time in agonizing months, she had slept deeply and entirely, without fear. Downstairs, the comforting, rich smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted enticingly through the modern apartment. Noah sat casually at the massive kitchen island, dressed in a soft sweater, scrolling intently through his iPad. The morning financial news glowing brightly across the large screen. When Olivia walked into the kitchen, wrapped in a plush robe, he looked up, and his entire expression softened with warmth. "You officially made the front page of the business section," he said gently. Her stomach instantly tightened with leftover anxiety. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "It's a mix of both," he admitted honestly, pouring her a mug of coffee. "But it is mostly incredibly good." He slowly turned the iPad around toward her. A massive headline in bold, black letters stretched prominently across the top of the screen. Ethan Reed under federal investigation for massive financial misconduct and intellectual theft. Source claims flagship idea was stolen from wife. Directly below the shocking headline was a highly unflattering photo. It showed Ethan looking incredibly pale, sweaty, and shaken as he was escorted through a quiet hotel hallway by two stern compliance officers. Directly adjacent to it was another photo. It showed Olivia standing flawlessly at the gala, microphone confidently in hand, looking incredibly powerful, radiant, and completely composed. A strange, overwhelming mixture of complex feelings surged rapidly inside her. Chest, disbelief, relief, grief for the past, and something incredibly close to absolute vindication. "They are actively interviewing dozens of his employees this morning," Noah said, tapping the screen. "Several senior staff members have already publicly confirmed that he frequently bragged about taking full credit for your work behind closed doors." Olivia exhaled a very slow, shuddering breath. "People actually finally believe me." Noah placed a large, warm hand gently over hers on the counter. "They always would have believed you, Liv, if you had just been allowed to speak the truth." Before she could even begin to respond to his kindness, her cell phone buzzed relentlessly on the counter. Hundreds of unread messages flooded the screen in a cascade. There were frantic emails from HR representatives, texts from former guilt-ridden colleagues, and messages from old acquaintances she hadn't spoken to in years. But one specific, chilling notification made her completely freeze in her tracks. It was a new voicemail from Ethan. She stared blankly at the little icon, a familiar dread slowly creeping up her spine like ice. "Do you want to actually hear what he has to say?" Noah asked incredibly, cautiously, giving her space. Olivia nodded firmly. She pressed play and put the phone on speaker. Ethan's voice instantly spilled through the speaker, sounding utterly frantic, violently shaken, and completely stripped of his usual Weaponized arrogance. Liv, please. It's me. You need to call me right now. I desperately need to explain everything to you. There are complex things going on that you just don't understand. They violently twisted my words in that recording. Brooke maliciously lied to them about the numbers. You are literally ruining my entire life. Olivia, please, don't do this to me. We can easily fix this together. Just please call me back. The desperate message ended abruptly with a click. There was absolutely no genuine apology for his actions. There was absolutely no personal accountability taken. There was only pathetic desperation and immediate, frantic blame shifted onto everyone else. Olivia calmly set the phone face down on the granite counter, her fingers trembling slightly. It wasn't from fear this time, but from absolute, undeniable clarity. He actually still thinks he can easily manipulate my emotions, she whispered, in awe of his delusion. Because he absolutely always has in the past, Noah said incredibly quietly, sipping his coffee. She swallowed hard, squaring her shoulders, and looked up at him with fierce eyes. Not anymore. Later that same busy afternoon, Olivia gathered in a secure boardroom with her brilliant attorney, Noah, and a senior representative from an elite, independent auditing firm. Together, they meticulously reviewed absolutely everything. They had the authenticated napkin sketch, Brooke's damning audio recording, dozens of sworn employee statements, and mountains of proof highlighting the massive financial inconsistencies. The physical evidence was absolutely, undeniably overwhelming. You have an incredibly strong legal case here, her attorney said, smiling fiercely. And not just for a highly favorable divorce. You have a massive case for intellectual property rights, for punitive financial damages, and for public corporate recognition. Olivia sat back in her leather chair, completely stunned by the reality of it all. I honestly never, ever wanted revenge. You are absolutely not getting petty revenge, the attorney corrected her sharply. You are getting legal justice. And, Noah added softly from beside her, you are finally getting your own life back. By early evening, major news outlets released official corporate statements confirming Ethan's immediate, unpaid suspension pending a massive federal investigation. Social media platforms completely erupted in outrage. Powerful executives publicly denounced his actions to save their own skin. Former loyal employees rapidly distanced themselves, and wealthy investors began frantically withdrawing their financial interest from his firm. Ethan's once incredibly promising, untouchable career now dangled precariously by a rapidly fraying thread, entirely of his own malicious making. As the entire corporate world aggressively reacted to the scandal, Olivia found herself standing alone on Noah's high-rise balcony overlooking the vast city. The Manhattan skyline glowed with absolute purpose. It looked sharp, incredibly bright, and vibrantly alive. She wrapped her arms tightly around herself, Absolutely not from the cold wind, but from the overwhelming, physical relief of, finally, truly being seen by the world. Noah stepped quietly out beside her, gently handing her a warm mug of herbal tea. What exactly are you thinking about out here? She hesitated for a moment, then chose to speak completely honestly. I spent so many agonizing long years constantly wondering if I was the actual problem in the marriage. I wondered if I was inherently unlovable, or if I was literally going crazy. Her voice softened to a whisper. But last night at the gala, I finally remembered exactly who I was before I ever met him. And I think I desperately want her back. Noah smiled, an incredibly gentle, endlessly patient smile. She absolutely never left you, Liv. She was just quietly waiting in the dark for you to be ready. Olivia breathed in the crisp, cold night air deeply, physically feeling it expand her lungs, expand her hope, and expand her future. For the very first time in years, she didn't feel shattered or broken. She felt immensely powerful. She felt undeniably true. She felt completely free. And the entire world was, finally, clearly seeing the brilliant woman Ethan Reed had tried so incredibly hard to permanently silence. Olivia returned to the New Jersey townhouse 2 days later. She didn't go back because she nostalgically wanted to, but because her strict attorney explicitly advised that she needed to legally collect highly important financial documents and essential personal belongings before the impending divorce proceedings violently escalated. Noah absolutely insisted on driving her there, stubbornly refusing to let her walk back into that toxic house completely alone. She didn't argue with him. Not this time. She knew she was incredibly strong now. Yes, but even the strongest women on earth shouldn't have to face the physical remnants of their deepest trauma without steady support. When the car finally pulled into the familiar driveway, Olivia felt a sharp, old ache rise unbidden in her chest. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. It had the same dark shutters, the same flickering porch light, the same curtains she used to meticulously iron on quiet Sundays. But she was absolutely not the same submissive woman who had lived inside it. Noah stepped out of the car first, his eyes scanning the quiet suburban area, gently, being protective without being overly overbearing. I will be right out, here waiting if you need me for anything. Olivia nodded gratefully, intentionally steadying her breathing before turning her key and unlocking the heavy front door. The exact moment she stepped inside the foyer, she realized Ethan was home. His expensive leather suitcase lay completely open and ransacked in the hallway. Thousands of printed papers were strewn chaotically across the dining room table. He looked exactly like a man who was rapidly unraveling at the seams. His normally perfect hair was messy and greasy. His expensive dress shirt was heavily wrinkled and untucked, and his bloodshot eyes looked wild and desperate. The confident, arrogant executive from the gala had completely evaporated into thin air. Olivia, he breathed heavily, standing up so quickly his chair scraped the floor. She said absolutely nothing to him. She just walked purposefully past him, heading straight upstairs to the master bedroom. Her large suitcase lay open, exactly where she had left it weeks ago, half filled from the terrible night she had almost run away into the rain with absolutely nothing but her crushing grief. Ethan frantically followed her up the stairs. Liv, please, just stop and listen to me. She absolutely didn't stop packing her clothes. I am not here to talk to you. Ethan. He ran a visibly shaky hand through his messy hair, his voice rising in panic. You completely destroyed me. She completely froze, her hands hovering over a folded sweater. Then, she turned around incredibly slowly to face him. I destroyed you, she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. You maliciously leaked that illegal audio recording, he accused her loudly, pointing a shaking finger. You completely humiliated me in front of the entire board. You actively ruined my flawless reputation. Olivia actually laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound completely devoid of humor, completely devoid of softness. Ethan, you completely humiliated yourself. You maliciously burned my hard work in the fireplace. You constantly lied to my face. You cheated on me with your subordinate. You aggressively stole credit from me. That audio recording absolutely wasn't sabotage. It was just the absolute truth finally catching up to you. He stepped desperately closer to her, his voice cracking under the pressure. I know I made huge mistakes. Liv, but we can easily fix this. We were incredibly good together. We were the perfect team. We were good when it exclusively benefited you, she said incredibly quietly, her eyes boring into his soul. When I actively dimmed myself down, when I gladly carried the entire heavy weight of our life on my back so you could run around and play the hero everywhere else. That's absolutely not fair, he yelled defensively. It's honest, she shot back. Ethan's handsome face violently twisted with sheer, primal fear. It was the specific, terrifying kind of panic that comes only when a controlling man suddenly realizes his absolute power over a victim has slipped entirely beyond saving. I really don't want to lose you. Liv. You already did, she said simply, turning away from him. She turned back to her open suitcase, methodically folding her clothes, packing away the very last remaining pieces of a domestic life that had never truly belonged to her, as much as she had desperately convinced herself it did. Then, in a final act of desperation, Ethan said the absolute one thing he should never, ever have said aloud. You are absolutely nothing without me. The entire bedroom went completely, terrifyingly still. Olivia very slowly zipped up her heavy suitcase, deliberately set it aside on the floor, and turned to face him fully. Her voice was incredibly calm, not angry, not cold, not cruel, but devastatingly, flawlessly clear. I was absolutely nothing when I was with you, she said, holding his terrified gaze. Now, I am finally becoming someone. Ethan's arrogant face completely crumbled, his sheer panic rapidly turning into vicious, defensive anger. You actually think Noah Carter truly cares about you? He's just using you for your IP. Brooke violently used me. Absolutely everyone in this city wants something from you. Olivia slowly shook her head, a look of profound pity crossing her features. The absolute only person who ever maliciously used anyone in this house is you. Ethan. She confidently grabbed her bag and walked right past him toward the stairs. Ethan desperately grabbed her arm, not forcefully or violently, but incredibly, desperately. Liv, please, don't walk out that door. We can rebuild from this. His voice cracked pathetically. Please, Liv, I need you. Olivia looked slowly down at his shaking hand gripping her arm. For so many years, that exact same hand had rigidly directed her entire life. It had subtly dictated what she wore, heavily influenced how she spoke, and completely controlled how she existed in the world. Now, looking at it, it just felt completely foreign and pathetic to her. You're wrong, Ethan, she whispered softly. The absolute only thing you desperately need right now is basic accountability. She firmly pried his trembling fingers off her arm and confidently stepped away. His weak knees actually buckled slightly, exactly as if the physical act of finally losing his grip on her had physically drained him of his life force. Goodbye, she said simply. He desperately reached out for her again, but Olivia was already walking gracefully down the stairs, the bright, warm sunlight streaming in from the open front door perfectly lit her path forward. Noah stood patiently outside on the sidewalk, watching her emerge with quiet, immense respect. He absolutely wasn't rushing her. He wasn't touching her. He was just simply being there for her. She walked out into the sunlight without ever looking back. The loud, final click of the heavy front door closing permanently behind her sounded exactly like turning the final page of a horrific chapter she had miraculously survived. By sheer, unadulterated resilience. Noah quickly opened the passenger car door for her. Are you okay? Olivia exhaled deeply a long, trembling breath that completely emptied something dark from her lungs and instantly filled them with something brand new. I think, she said incredibly softly, looking up at the sky, I am finally truly free. Noah smiled a warm, gentle smile. Then let's go build whatever beautiful thing comes next. As the sleek car pulled smoothly away from the suburban curb, Olivia looked at the brick house one absolute last time. It rapidly grew smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror until it became absolutely nothing at all. For the very first time in her adult life, she had boldly chosen herself, and she absolutely didn't regret it for a second. The busy weeks immediately following Olivia's final permanent break from Ethan unfolded beautifully, exactly like a slow, golden sunrise. They were steady, incredibly warm, and brilliantly illuminating dark corners of her life she honestly hadn't dared to look at in years. She happily moved into a small but stunningly beautiful. Apartment in Brooklyn. Heights. It was a gorgeous, sunlit space featuring charming exposed brick walls, polished hardwood floors, and a tiny iron balcony perfectly overlooking the rushing East River. It absolutely wasn't luxurious or massive, but it was entirely hers. Every single piece of furniture she brought inside, she chose with absolute intention. Every single green plant she placed lovingly near the large windows miraculously thrived. Every single morning, she peacefully brewed her coffee without a heavy knot of anxiety sitting tight in her throat. It was the very first home she'd ever lived in that truly, deeply felt like absolute freedom. Noah graciously helped her move in over the weekend. He spent hours assembling complicated IKEA shelves, effortlessly carrying heavy boxes up the stairs, and stubbornly refusing to let her lift absolutely anything he considered too heavy. For someone who had already done enough heavy lifting in her life. But he absolutely never crossed a line with her. He never pushed for romance. He never dropped subtle hints. He never presumed anything about her feelings. He simply showed up for her, patiently, quietly, and consistently. One quiet evening, while he was carefully hanging a framed art print perfectly straight above her new desk, he said, "This place already completely feels like you." Olivia smiled softly, unpacking a box of books. "I'm honestly still figuring out exactly what me looks like." "That's the absolute best part of this," Noah replied, turning around to smile at her. "You finally get to completely decide." And she absolutely did. Every single day, her aggressive attorney called her with triumphant updates. Ethan's massive corporate misconduct investigation was rapidly expanding beyond control. Multiple senior employees were officially corroborating Brooks' damning audio recording. The corporate board had officially launched a massive independent forensic audit of his accounts. Olivia listened to the updates completely without bitterness. True justice was actively working behind the scenes, slow, methodical, but entirely inexorable, and she didn't have to lift a single finger to help it along. Her only job now was to build her future, and she was more than ready. Noah formally invited her to his corporate office one bright morning. It was a massive, glass-walled workspace located on the 31st floor, overlooking the breathtaking Manhattan skyline. He proudly introduced her to his development team, a brilliant, diverse group of young tech innovators who looked at her absolutely not with pity for her scandal, but with immense, genuine professional respect for her mind. He gave her a grand tour of the facility, ending in a smaller, beautifully appointed, empty conference room. "This," he said quietly, placing a thick, pristine folder on the center of the glass table, "is entirely for you." Inside the folder were the massive, early-stage legal documents for Parker Ledger. There were detailed financial projections, brilliant UX wireframe, drafts, lucrative development partnership offers, and ironclad intellectual property protections filed in her name. It was real. It was tangible. It was the exact legal blueprint of a massive corporate future she had never imagined she could actually claim for herself. Olivia's hands trembled violently as she slowly read through the paperwork. Noah, this is absolutely huge. It's entirely yours, Noah said simply, his eyes shining with pride. I will gladly help you in absolutely however way you want me to. As a business mentor, as a silent partner, or not at all. This is your brilliant vision. Live. Hot tears aggressively pricked the corners of her eyes, but they absolutely weren't from sadness. They were from a gratitude so incredibly deep and profound that it physically felt like healing medicine in her veins. She spent the next several grueling weeks actively designing, planning, and refining the app. Her battered MacBook Air became her absolute constant companion. Blank pages quickly filled with brilliant, innovative ideas she had once been forced to shove aside for Ethan's sake. She confidently held meetings with top developers, financial advisors, and creative directors. She fully rediscovered her powerful voice while sitting in rooms filled with intelligent people who actually desperately wanted to hear what she had to say. And very slowly, day by day, Olivia completely transformed from a traumatized woman reclaiming what was stolen into a powerful woman actively creating exactly what she deserved. Meanwhile, the global media narrative had shifted fully and completely in her favor. Glowing articles in Forbes and Wired highly praised her tech innovation, her undeniable courage under fire, and her quiet, unshakable public dignity. Massive angel investors aggressively requested meetings with her. Empowered women reached out to her daily on social media, bravely sharing their own painful stories. Stories of being constantly overshadowed, violently silenced, and cruelly dismissed by the men in their lives. Olivia compassionately responded to as many of the messages as she humanly could, because she intimately understood now that her story absolutely wasn't just hers alone. It was a powerful echo of countless others. One rainy afternoon, while intensely reviewing beta prototypes at her desk, she unexpectedly received a highly formal email from the HR department at Ethan's former company. It was a massive, formal, legal apology. It included a written, public acknowledgement of her primary contribution to their flagship early product concept, and an official press statement completely clearing her good name of the vicious lies Ethan had spread to the board. Her attorney excitedly followed up via a phone call mere minutes later. The corporate board is officially offering you a massive financial settlement, directly tied to your stolen intellectual property. It is incredibly generous. Olivia. Very, very generous. She sat back heavily in her desk chair, completely stunned. After agonizing months of psychological torment, vicious manipulation, and total emotional erasure, her good name was finally being fully restored publicly. Not because Ethan benevolently wanted it to happen, but because the undeniable truth violently demanded it. Later that beautiful evening, Olivia stood peacefully on her small balcony, watching the bright sun melt into vibrant oranges and pinks behind the iconic skyline. City lights began to flicker brilliantly across the dark river. There, reflections dancing on the water like thousands of small pieces of gold. Noah joined her incredibly quietly, gently handing her a warm, soothing cup of chamomile tea. "You actively did this," he said incredibly softly, looking out at the city. She slowly shook her head, taking a sip. "No, Noah. I simply survived it. And now, I'm actively rebuilding." He smiled a bright, proud smile. "And doing a damn good job of it, too." Olivia leaned comfortably against the cold metal railing, letting the freezing winter breeze brush gently against her skin. For the very first time in years, she felt entirely, completely whole. She was no longer waiting anxiously for the other shoe to drop. She wasn't hoping for a miracle. She wasn't breaking. She was beautifully, fiercely becoming. And the entire world was finally, joyfully, rising up with her. The exact day Ethan Reed's arrogant world officially and permanently collapsed did absolutely not arrive accompanied by blaring police sirens or the dramatic clink of metal handcuffs. It arrived incredibly quietly, exactly like a sharp, thin blade slipped silently between his ribs when he absolutely least expected it. Olivia obviously wasn't present for any of his downfall, but the fragmented pieces of the pathetic story reached her slowly over time. They were carried to her by breaking news alerts, gloating text messages from former colleagues, and a brief, triumphant call from her attorney. The end began on a completely mundane Wednesday morning. Ethan arrived at his towering office building wearing a severely wrinkled, unpressed suit, deep, dark circles heavily bruising the pale skin under his bloodshot eyes. He barely even slept anymore. His cell phone voicemail box was completely full of aggressively ignored calls from furious attorneys, panicking board members, and deeply worried family members who had seen the news. His haggard reflection in the polished elevator doors looked exactly like a haunted ghost. He was incredibly pale, physically shaky, and entirely stripped of his trademark, arrogant confidence. As he stepped out onto the 42nd floor, a chilling, absolute silence greeted him. There were absolutely no cheerful morning greetings from the staff. No fake smiles from assistants. No deferential nods of respect from the junior executives. People actively avoided making eye contact with him, aggressively whispering to each other behind thick conference room glass as he passed by. He walked slowly to his corner office and was shocked to find two massive, armed, corporate security guards standing firmly inside his doorway. "Mr. Reed," the larger guard said firmly, holding out his hand. "We absolutely need your security badge." Ethan blinked rapidly, utterly confused. "What? Why?" "It's absolutely not negotiable, sir." His hands trembled violently as he slowly removed the expensive ID lanyard he had proudly worn around his neck like a prestigious badge of honor for years. The stern guard took it without a word, slipping it securely into a small manila evidence envelope. Then, Ethan finally noticed the crisp white envelope sitting squarely in the center of his otherwise empty desk. It was his official termination letter, effective immediately. He skimmed the bold text, his eyes widening in horror at the listed causes. Massive financial misconduct, tampered corporate records, highly unethical behavior, intellectual property theft, severe breach of fiduciary duty. The entire room began to violently spin around him. "No," he whispered brokenly, aggressively clutching the hard edge of his desk to keep from falling. "You absolutely can't fire me. I personally built this entire department. I built this flagship product." A senior board member suddenly stepped into the open doorway, his arms crossed, angrily over his chest. "The specific product you claim you built is currently under massive federal review. Ethan, the brilliant idea you maliciously stole belonged entirely to your wife. The sickening psychological manipulation you used against her is heavily documented. You profoundly embarrassed this entire company on a global scale. And now, you're officially done here." "I can easily explain all of this," Ethan pleaded desperately. "There is absolutely nothing left to explain," the board member said coldly. "And Olivia, she completely lied to you all," Ethan cried. The board member's expression hardened into pure disgust. "She absolutely didn't lie to anyone. We have seen the hard evidence. All of it." Ethan literally felt his weak knees give out beneath him. He collapsed heavily into his expensive leather chair, burying his head deeply in his trembling hands. His massive corporate empire, his flawless public image, his carefully curated, perfect life had all violently turned to ash in a matter of seconds. "Security will aggressively escort you out of the building now," the board member finished incredibly coldly. "And Ethan, do not ever attempt to contact her again. Our lawyers will be watching." As the two massive guards forcefully led him by the arms through the crowded open-plan office, hundreds of employees stepped silently aside to watch the spectacle. Some whispered furiously to each other. Some watched in stunned silence, and some openly smirked at his downfall. It was the incredibly slow, profoundly humiliating walk of shame of an arrogant man who once truly believed he was a god among men. Outside the glass building, a massive swarm of aggressive reporters and paparazzi swarmed him instantly. "Mr. Reed, is it actually true that your wife created the original app concept? Did you illegally alter financial documents to secure your promotion? Are you currently facing federal criminal charges? Do you have any regrets about maliciously burning her hard work in the fireplace?" Burning her work. The shouted words hit him like a physical, brutal slap across the face. The audio recording had leaked. They knew absolutely everything. He violently shoved past the blinding camera flashes, keeping his hands tightly over his sweating face. and stumbled blindly down the busy street. Police sirens echoed loudly somewhere in the distance. A massive gust of freezing cold wind hit his flushed cheeks. He looked incredibly disoriented and lost, exactly like a terrified man finally waking up from a horrific nightmare, only to tragically realize that the nightmare was his actual, waking reality. Meanwhile, safely across the river in Brooklyn Heights, Olivia was sitting comfortably in a quiet, sunlit cafe, happily reviewing complex design notes with her new, eager development team. She absolutely didn't know exactly what was happening to Ethan at that exact moment. She didn't need to know. Her bright, beautiful life absolutely no longer revolved around Ethan Reed's toxic choices. But at exactly 1:34 p.m., her phone vibrated loudly on the table with a breaking news alert. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before gently tapping the notification. The massive headline read, "Ethan Reed terminated from flagship fintech firm. Massive federal investigation expands." A highly unflattering picture prominently accompanied the article. It showed a disheveled, sweating Ethan being aggressively escorted out of the building through a massive crowd of screaming reporters by security guards. There was absolutely no arrogance left in his posture, no weaponized charm in his smile, no fake confidence. There was just absolute, unadulterated consequence. Olivia stared deeply at the glowing screen for a very long moment. She wasn't smiling in triumph. She absolutely wasn't celebrating his ruin. She was simply breathing normally. True justice wasn't loud or explosive. True justice wasn't cruel or vindictive. It was perfectly balanced. It was a soft, steady exhale that finally, permanently released the crushing weight that had sat on her chest. For years, Noah quietly slid into the wooden booth seat directly across from her. Instantly, noticing the profound shift in her facial expression. "Are you okay?" She slowly turned the phone screen around toward him. He read the bold headline silently. "Ah," he said softly. "It finally happened." Olivia nodded very slowly. "Yes, it did." "Do you actually feel any better?" he asked, his eyes full of genuine concern. She thought about his question. She truly, deeply thought about it. "I feel completely complete," she whispered finally, setting the phone face down. "Not because he tragically fell from grace, but because I am absolutely no longer trapped underneath him." Noah smiled a brilliant, gentle smile. That is exactly what true healing feels like. Live. Olivia looked back out the large cafe window. The massive city was vibrantly alive and vast around her, full of endless possibility. For the very first time in her life, Ethan's spectacular downfall absolutely wasn't her story anymore. Her magnificent rise to the top was. She calmly swiped the news notification away, tucked her phone safely back into her purse, and confidently returned to her design work. Because true justice had already efficiently done its job, and now absolutely nothing in the world stood between her and the beautiful, powerful life she was always meant to build. Winter eventually settled slowly and beautifully over Brooklyn, gently dusting the old brownstone rooftops with a thin, sparkling veil of pristine white snow. It perfectly softened the loud, chaotic noise of the massive city, in the exact same beautiful way that true healing slowly softens old, deep wounds. Olivia Parker stood peacefully on her small iron balcony one early morning, wrapped warmly in a thick, plush robe, silently watching the bright winter sun climb slowly over the rushing East River. The morning air was freezing cold, enough to physically sting her pink cheeks, but she absolutely didn't mind it at all. She profoundly loved how incredibly quiet and still the entire world felt. At dawn, how utterly peaceful it was. She breathed out heavily, and the freezing air puffed into a small, white cloud. Her current life looked absolutely nothing like it had just a few agonizing months ago. And yet, for the very first time, it finally, truly felt entirely like hers. Inside the apartment, her home was incredibly warm, deeply filled with the soft, comforting smell of cinnamon from a large candle she had lit the night before. The space looked beautifully lived in and deeply personal. Lush green plants were thriving in terracotta pots by the large window. Classic books were scattered casually on a wooden coffee table, and brilliant design sketches were proudly pinned to a large corkboard with absolute purpose and joy. Her battered MacBook Air sat open on her modern desk, proudly displaying the absolute latest, flawless prototype of Parker Ledger, her own company, her own brilliant vision, her own lasting legacy. The startup project had aggressively grown significantly faster than she had ever expected. Immediately after the explosive gala, massive venture investors began reaching out to her daily, deeply impressed not by her scandalous past, but by her undeniable, raw potential. An elite development firm eagerly partnered with her to build the back end. A massive, women-led venture capital group offered immense financial support. Old college classmates she hadn't spoken to in over a decade reconnected, enthusiastically cheering her on. Every single corporate meeting, every flawless pitch, every late night brainstorming session happily reminded her that she absolutely hadn't been erased from the world. She had simply been deeply underestimated, and now she had spectacularly risen above it all. That beautiful morning, Noah knocked incredibly gently on her front door. He walked in carrying 2 hot Starbucks cups. Hers always came exactly how she liked it, without him ever having to ask, a grande latte with heavy cinnamon powder and absolutely no whip. She opened the door, smiling warmly at the sight of him. "You're up incredibly early today," she said, letting him inside out of the cold. "I really like the quiet mornings," he answered, stamping the snow off his boots. Noah set the hot drinks carefully on the granite counter and took in the cozy apartment with a soft, affectionate smile. "It really feels like a true home in here now." "It definitely is," she said simply, taking a sip of her coffee. He hesitated for a moment, leaning casually against the kitchen island. Your attorney actually called my office late last night. She said the massive financial settlement is officially, legally finalized. Olivia nodded, looking down at her mug. It is. The brutal intellectual property dispute had been officially closed entirely in her favor. The financial damages legally awarded to her were absolutely staggering. Far more money than she had ever expected. But it wasn't the millions of dollars that truly mattered to her soul. It was the public acknowledgement. It was her brilliant idea, her hard work, and her good name, fully restored publicly and permanently. It was a quiet, legal victory, but an undeniably powerful one. Noah watched her face incredibly carefully. How do you actually feel about it? Oh. Olivia wrapped her cold hands securely around her warm latte. I feel incredibly lighter, she said honestly. It feels exactly like I finally, permanently put down a massive, crushing weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying around for years. And what about Ethan? He asked incredibly gently, treading lightly. She exhaled a soft breath. I absolutely don't hate him anymore. I honestly don't wish him any more pain in life. He brilliantly managed to do all of that. To himself. She took another sip of coffee, her dark eyes softening with genuine peace. I just truly hope that one day he actually learned something profound from all this destruction. Noah nodded very slowly, profound respect in his eyes. You are an incredibly good person, Liv. I'm a significantly stronger person, she corrected him with a gentle smile. There's a massive difference. A beautiful, comfortable silence settled easily between them in the kitchen. Outside the window, thick snow continued drifting peacefully past the glass. The entire world felt incredibly clean, completely renewed. After a long moment, Noah spoke up again, his voice slightly nervous. There's actually something I've desperately wanted to say to you for a very long time. Olivia looked up, her heart suddenly fluttering gently in her chest. It absolutely wasn't fluttering in fear this time, but in pure, joyful anticipation. He stepped slightly closer to her, his voice incredibly steady and sincere. I am so incredibly proud of you. And not just because of what tragically happened to Ethan. Not just because of the massive success of Parker Ledger. But because you absolutely didn't let what violently broke you permanently define you. Olivia felt a profound, beautiful warmth violently bloom deep in her chest. Noah, she whispered softly. You absolutely don't owe me an answer to this right now, he said quickly. His hands slipping nervously into his trouser pockets. I am simply here because I genuinely want to be here. For as long as you want that, too. She moved closer to him, very slowly, very deliberately, until she stood only mere inches away, looking up into his kind eyes. Her voice was incredibly soft, but absolute in its certainty. I do want you here. His breath hitched slightly in his throat. But absolutely not to save me, she added fiercely. placing a gentle hand on his chest. Just to stay with me. Noah smiled. It was a quiet, profoundly heartfelt smile that beautifully reached his eyes. Then I will gladly stay. They stood closely together by the glass balcony doors, peacefully watching the entire world slowly shift from a depressing, cold gray to a brilliant, vibrant gold as the winter sun rose higher in the sky. Olivia leaned her head gently onto his strong shoulder, letting the incredible, safe warmth of the moment completely settle into her weary bones. She absolutely wasn't frantically rushing towards something shiny and new. She wasn't desperately escaping from something toxic and old. She was simply intentionally choosing her own life again. And for the very first time in forever, she actively chose joy. She chose a love that was not blind, not desperate, but entirely healthy and complete. She chose endless possibility. She finally chose herself. Olivia Parker had tragically lost absolutely everything she thought she wanted once upon a time, but she painstakingly rebuilt it. She rose from the ashes. She learned to love again. And this time around, the grand ending wasn't just about mere survival. It was about profound peace. It was about absolute freedom. It was finally, beautifully, undeniably hers. And just like that, our incredible story finally comes to an end. But you, yes, you, are still here with me. If you faithfully stayed, listening until this very moment, it means that something deep in Olivia's journey truly touched a hidden part of your own heart today. Maybe her undeniable courage reminded you of your own dormant strength. Maybe her painful, healing journey mirrored something you are quietly, desperately trying to rebuild in your own life right now. Her powerful story teaches us a very simple, yet profound truth. When someone arrogant stops seeing your inherent worth, it absolutely doesn't mean you've lost it. It simply means they never truly had the capacity to understand it in the first place. As the great Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wisely wrote, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Olivia actively chose to change her thoughts, and her entire life miraculously changed right along with them. She bravely chose her dignity over her pain. She chose the absolute truth over her fear. And she chose total renewal over toxic bitterness. That is an incredible power that absolutely any of us can choose to wield, no matter where we currently stand in life today. Life doesn't always magically give us the sincere apology we know we deserve, but it absolutely does give us the amazing chance to actively rewrite our own beautiful ending. One honest, brave decision at a time. If this emotional journey made you feel significantly stronger, truly seen, or even just a little bit braver today, then please, don't leave quietly. Hit that like button right now so we know you felt something real. Share this video with someone in your life who desperately needs to find their own strength. 2. And please, subscribe to the channel because we are actively building a beautiful community where incredible stories heal and where you truly matter. You are absolutely not alone in your fight, and you never were. See you in the next video.